You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
When was the last time you stood up and applauded a movie? Audiences across America are standing up, applauding, and cheering a film called Walking Tall.
I thought you all tall! Like you gotta learn how to crawl! Listen to this, me, you white with you give him your total right to do the same damn thing, any one of you!
Gonna buy you guys a drink? Guess not.
Patrick Swayze is
Dalton.
I thought you'd be bigger.
Opinions vary.
When he's around, anything can happen,
How does a guy like you end up a bouncer?
Just lucky, I guess.
and usually does.
If somebody gets in your face, I want you to be nice.
Don't be rude!
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature, Grindhouse style, where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we are becoming the Rat Kings, and that'll make more sense when Josh explains a little later. Join the sleaze.
That's right. And we also decided on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we are in our, I think, 6th year of episodes. So there's like 150 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series where we talk about new release genre films, which will be important for this one because there's actually a remake of a film we're talking about today that we're going to be talking about soon in the bonus transmission. So if you haven't made the jump yet, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. We recommend doing that. And speaking of which, we had a bunch of people make the jump this week, so we'll give them their shout outs here. We had Gnome Fishoff sign up. We had Max CP, we had Colin McCubbin, we had Harry King, we had Jay, Ross Bullington, Jay Spinter, Mascrone, Stephen Dunning, who I think signed up for what appears to be like a year of the show, because you can get a little bit of a discounted monthly rate if you sign up for a year in advance. Same with Anthony Severin, I believe, signed up for a year for a show here. I'm saying I believe because I don't know what the fuck currency that is, but I respect you guys. I just get the little symbol here. So we had Shit W sign up for $5 a month. We had John Kirby, Nick Hill, and last but not least, Trig. So thanks to all of you folks for the support. Hope you're enjoying all those bonus episodes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening on either one of those platforms, and I can see the stats, I can see you right now listening on both those platforms, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners, and we've been seeing some nice reviews lately. I've been enjoying reading them. They bring some warmth to my heart. And sometimes I read them to Jamie when he, I whisper to him when he's falling asleep.
Yeah.
So if you want that to happen to your writing, it can happen. So thank you very much for that support. We appreciate that as well. And then the last plug is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you guys can think of. And you guys have thought of a lot of stuff. We've had some notebooks. We've had some pillows. We've had some shirts. Someone bought a coffee mug recently. The link to that is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com for anyone who's interested. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks on the main feed would have heard from us, and we would have had special returning guest Perry Rilland joining us once again to show us something grotesque and extreme from the continent of Asia. We talked about two expertly directed, unconventional 90s crime thrillers, both about 5 guys in the criminal underworlds, one in Japan, one in Hong Kong, who are trying to get a job done. And it sort of goes wrong. The first one, it goes a lot more wrong, which is Takeshi Ishii's ruthlessly bleak Yakuza heist horror hybrid called Gonin from 1995. And I do want to emphasize the horror of the second half of that film, which is you'll know watching that was made by a guy who drew some extreme sexual and violent manga in his day, and that was what he was known for.
I believe it was called, some of the manga was called Angel Guts, if anyone's interested. So
yeah,
very metal, very awesome.
So you ever wondered what
sense.
a crime movie directed by the Angel Guts guy was like? That was that movie. And we paired it with Johnny Toe's more kind of artfully controlled triad hangout movie called The Mission from 1999, which has one of the best just like hangout scores, a bunch of guys just kicking a paper ball around while waiting to die. And it had some of that Howard Hawks hangout energy that we wanted to bring into this week's conversation.
Yeah, there's a ton of death in it, but it's really at the end of the day about friendship, and that's it's a beautiful thing. Thank you, Johnny Toe.
That's right.
I love that fucking movie, man.
So good.
So that was 2 weeks ago over on the main feed, but last week over on the Patreon feed, we did a double feature of lonely lawmen who have been abandoned by their communities, who are taking a stand against corruption in one of the 1950s most renowned sort of Oscar-winning westerns, High Noon from 1952, directed by Fred Zinnemann and starring an aged and weary Gary Cooper, who's kind of dealing with the ticking time bomb until his own death, essentially. But it's done in a very Stanley Kramer civics class era Hollywood way. And then we paired that with the 1981 gritty science fiction update on a very similar premise and character in Outland, directed by Peter Hyams and starring a post-Bond Sean Connery, which features, among other things, alongside a similar situation, a lot more goopy head explosions and drug-related corporate conspiracy noir stuff mixed into the saloon brawls and gunfights.
Oh yeah, it's pretty incredible. It is basically High Noon with squibs and head explosions. It's a beautiful thing, and High Noon just has such an incredible control over the editing and the pacing of that movie, and the using the real time effect it's fantastic. Definitely recommend.
Yeah, that's definitely more the appeal of that versus Outland, which is a little bit more lax with that. But Outland makes up for it by having basically every person who worked on the production design and costuming of Alien doing all of the science fiction production design of the film. So it's dirty. It's awesome. I loved just the steady cam maneuvers through it. Incredible.
Yeah, it feels so lived in, and they have so many just extras going through all the facilities, and the use of miniature work and like matte paintings and stuff is unreal. So yeah, both movies are great.
It makes sense that guy was asked to could you do the 2001: A Space Odyssey sequel?
Yeah,
in terms of just pure science fiction design work. So, but yeah, so we haven't heard that episode. Patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week over on the Patreon feed. Mm-hmm. But moving on to this week, we have a very special returning guest joining us from the Extended Clip podcast. We have our boy Eddie here for a very special episode. I'm going to let him introduce.
Oh, man, I am so excited to have the pleasure of introducing this double feature. It's funny that you mentioned that Hawksian hangout vibe in Johnny Toe's The Mission, because Howard Hawks is actually how I'm going to introduce these two movies. Because you also mentioned High Noon, and I don't know if you mentioned this on your High Noon episode, but Rio Bravo was made because Howard Hawks hated High Noon so much.
Of course we did.
He wanted to
John
go back
Wayne was like, that's the most un-American
everything.
shit I've seen in my life.
Exactly. And so he went even scene by scene in Hawks on the scenes that corrected, quote unquote, that movie. But he also really hated the first feature of our double feature. He said of it, a well-made movie for a nation of morons. We are talking about Phil Karlson's 1973 neo-western neo-noir Walking Tall, starring the greatest movie star in America in 1973, Joe Don Baker.
That's right.
And then we are talking about a film that I genuinely think, had Howard Hawks survived another 15 years, he would have given a gold star of approval to. A film that emulates so much of the vibe of genre filmmaking that I like so much, that like Howard Hawks, even your combat-based men on a mission type movies are all going to be very funny. We are talking about Rowdy Herrington's 1988 masterpiece Roadhouse, starring Patrick Swayze.
Let's go.
That's right. We're talking the old school macho Western folk hero who has been updated for the vigilante justice revenge movie and the regional outlaw crime movie. Walking Tall and Roadhouse both did this, but they did it for just very different eras. Walking Tall has a lot of that 1970s like gruesome exploitation kind of register going for it, and Roadhouse has more of that 80s action movie Joel Silver sort of like romantic excess. But, you know, both do feature men very skilled with violence who reluctantly are trying to kind of impose their philosophies of goodness and decency back into these corrupt sort of rural counties. Although with Roadhouse, it's funny that it does eventually extend to a town, but at first it really just is, you know, we're just going to clean up this bar. You know, Joe Don Baker has Joe Don Baker has a lot more that he's trying to get done pretty early on. But yeah, there's also obviously a brand new remake of Roadhouse out, so we thought it was finally time to knock it off. And Eddie was the first person I went to when I was like, this is an episode that we are thinking about doing, because Eddie actually showed me Roadhouse. He let me stay on his place on his couch in LA when we were hanging out, and it was our New Year's movie we watched with our boy baby Rob Franco as well, and it was just an ultimate boys' night watch. And we wanted to extend that to everyone who was listening, because, you know, these are some boys' night watches, I feel like.
That is how you bring in the new year. My Lord.
Exactly. Like, it's not a comedy, but Roadhouse, and it's not a so bad it's good, because that doesn't exist. And maybe it does to you, but not in this context. No, Roadhouse is simply the most joyously funny movie there is, in my opinion. And I'm just so glad I'm going to get to talk about it with you guys. And then I was so taken aback by Walking Tall, man. That was just, it was so awesome. I can't wait to get into that first.
Yeah, so that being said, I think we're going to jump right into it here. Let's kick things off, and let's start with the movie that some people compared Roadhouse to when it came out, just because of how sort of a crowd-pleasing, guy standing up kind of movie it was. And he's standing tall. He's walking tall. That's what we're talking about here.
Walking Tall. It's a deeply moving contemporary film based on the true story of a young man who wouldn't surrender to the system, and the girl who always stood beside him.
You gambled your life, and no one has come to say thank you.
Maybe nobody really does give a damn. It's the picture your neighbors are talking about. It has been called the best American movie of the year. Join the audience's applauding. Walking Tall, rated R.
Beautiful.
All right.
Can I also throw in one more thing with the Howard Hawks connection as we get into Walking Tall? The father or grandpa character here is played by Noah Beery Jr., who's the guy who dies in the beginning of Only Angels Have Wings and is in Red River. And he is a great like transitional figure because his uncle, also Wallace Beery, was a great early sound actor, and then he passes that down a generation, and then Noah Beery becomes like the grandpa of New Hollywood and is the dad on Rockford Files, my favorite show of the 1970s. So Howard Hawks brings it all together, as does the Rockford Files.
Oh, that's awesome. Right. Yeah, that's going to launch us right into here to, we're talking Walking Tall, the 1973 American, apparently biographical vigilante revenge exploitation action thriller neo-noir where it's a film. It's a lot of genres there, and we're going to be talking it's directed by Phil Karlson. It's written by Mort Briskin and is starring Joe Don Baker as Mr. Walking Tall himself, a man named Buford Pusser, a real-life professional wrestler turned Tennessee sheriff who takes on the sort of local McNairy County corruption and various exploitation bougie class, I guess, of gangsters, gamblers, moonshiners, with nothing but his fists. and a big old stick. And this is our second or maybe I think third time, I believe, talking about the good old Texas boy Joe Don Baker. He was the 1960s and 70s TV actor turned tough exploitation movie action star turned eventual character actor into the 80s and 90s, including a number of Bond film appearances in the Dalton and Bronson era. I think we mentioned his brief role in Cool Hand Luke in 1967 when he was still mostly known for appearing on like TV Western shows, and then his upgrade to co-lead with Robert Duvall in Rolling Thunder director John Flynn's gritty adaptation of Richard Stark's Parker crime novel, The Outfit, in 1973, which he's great in. So as Eddie was kind of alluding to, 1973 was the year of Joe Don Baker. Walking Tall came out in February. Don Siegel's tough guy heist noir Charlie Varick, where he co-starred with Walter Matthau, came out in September, and The Outfit came out in October, which is just an insane collection of tough guy B-movie directors to work with in like a few months span. And the guy would go on to have a very prolific supporting actor career. He appeared in like Scorsese films, Tim Burton films, Robert Redford films. He even did some like low rent garbage, like a pro arcade 80s sexploitation comedy I got to see recently called Joysticks, where
he was in that?
Joysticks is a bit of an innuendo when you think about it. And right. Joe Don is the like wealthy guy. He's almost playing like the Ben Gazzara in Roadhouse role, but his main thing is that he thinks that video games and all the sex teens are having at the arcade while playing Pac-Man is ruining America. That's his whole deal. But Eddie, do you have any particular favorite Joe Don movies that you've seen or roles that you've seen him in?
I mean, I gotta say, this one has to be the best I've seen him in. There's a reason why this became such a cult sensation, because there's a mix of his like B-movie goofiness with a truly like sturdy, wide gate kind of chubby Americanness that every fucking conservative in the silent majority was gonna latch onto at the time. And I don't know, there's something really interesting about that, where this is a movie where, like I just said, for Nixon's silent majority, really, or at least to latch onto and identify with the character. But Phil Karlson's always just been about the truth of gritty crime movies. If you go back to his earliest work, and I don't know, have you guys ever talked about a Phil Karlson movie on this pod yet?
I was going to say this is going to be our first time talking about Phil Karlson, the fucking B-movie maestro, who got his start working his way up, from what I read, as a janitor at like Universal Pictures to eventually being an assistant director in the 1930s, kind of like pre-code era. And he worked with William Wyler, he worked with John Ford, and he kind of carried that era's sense of blunt, like no frills, but skillful and practical sort of genre movie making into the 40s and 50s, which is where he's really well known, because he did a lot of for hire sort of studio veteran workhorse gigs. But in between those, there's a lot of, and I haven't seen them all, but I did watch one called Kansas City Confidential this week, which was really good, which was just, very lean, very brute force, like B noirs, essentially, these like action crime thrillers that, he was really good with the staging and lighting. It made the movies feel a little bit more expensive and moody than the budgets that he was working with. And he definitely liked the idea of taking authentic details from like real crime stories and incorporating them into his noirs, which is why I went, it kind of makes sense that he would be attracted to a biographical crime film like this. And also Kansas City Confidential, that movie, it's a armored car bank robbery noir, but it's all dealing with like the fallout of the crime gone wrong. Like the procedural crime is only like 15 minutes of the movie, and then the rest of it is all the guys like double crossing each other and all that kind of stuff. It's very like Reservoir Dogs in that way. But that movie
sounds like Ringo Lamb might have stole that one.
Oh, there's a little bit crosstalk happening here.
Steal.
But that movie is just almost entirely sweaty faces and like blunt, brutal violence. And I was like, he makes a lot of sense for this movie. But Eddie, I also feel like I remember there was one I saw that you were a really big fan of. Which one was that one? Was it 99?
99 River Street, I think, is his best, but I think the closest analog to this one would be the Phoenix City Story. And I just wanted to talk about Karlson a little bit, because that's what makes this, and especially the Joe Don Baker performance, so magical to me, is that this is a true mix of its time of 70s exploitation, low budget B movies, and like the soul of someone who was making B movies 20 years earlier when they were at their best. So I would highly recommend Phoenix City Story for another one that's like, this is a true story. And it goes so far in the no frills direction that it tells you the ending in newsreel footage in the beginning of the movie. And it's like, let's just see how this ended up happening, you know? And then 99 River Street, I'm going to go ahead and say it's the most just like brutally violent prime era film noir I've seen. Just like the chain fights in that are fucking disgusting. It's awesome. So I think he brings, oh yeah. I mean, when you're getting chain fights in the 50s, that's how you know you're getting some real shit in the 50s. And so I think Karlson brings that old school, like straight line sensibility to what is otherwise like a exploitation movie. And he like reins in Joe Don to an extent, but also lets him just fucking mug it up when it fits for the kind of light comedy or the excessive violence that turns to comedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's such a cool idea that like one of like the guys from that era, like so many of those filmmakers who made it into the new Hollywood era, they saw the deaths of the kinds of genre movies that they would make and the kind of gigs that they would get. And, you know, so many of them, if you like weren't able to transition into the kind of genre movies that late 60s and 70s audiences were looking for, many of them just didn't ever survive. And Phil Karlson was just a guy who was like, you know what, I'm going to change. Like, you know, I can do a B Western movie like Gunman's Walk that has like Tab Hunter and it's doing this very old school, Western generational tragedy kind of element to it. But then by the 70s, he was like, man, I'm going to do a war movie with Rock Hudson. I'm going to do an animal like rat horror movie called Ben, which I haven't seen, but I want to check out now. And eventually landing Walking Tall, where he was able to get in on, as Eddie was alluding to, the rural and regional sort of exploitation crime actioner that was taking off and would make Burt Reynolds a movie star, like in White Lightning, which also came out in 1973, which we've talked about. But also just the types of gruesomely cathartic kind of vigilante justice and revenge movies that were getting really popular post Dirty Harry. That was definitely like, I think like the really big selling point for why they went, you know, we're going to tell this story about this real guy, which I found this amazing New York Times profile with Karlson at the time, where he basically said that just he and his screenwriter friend Briskin, they had the idea to do this movie because they saw a CBS News report on this sheriff, Buford. It was just a 10-minute long thing. And, you know, and then they were like, we're going to make a movie that's, as he puts it, 60% of the movie is his life, which is why it has the suggested by certain events in the life of a living legend.
It's pretty wild, though, when you look at Buford's life, what was the accurate things in it? Because like when you're watching the movies, things get out of control in the sense of the violence and who's being killed and everything like that. And I was like, okay, so this must be the exaggerated stuff. And then you look up his life and like he had assassination attempts. His wife actually was killed in an assassination attempt. He did go around and seemed honestly pretty violent with who he was dealing with.
Karlson said he was attracted to it because he admitted to killing people with a big stick on TV. You know, like he was truly his justice was just like a blunt object. He's like that is how you deliver justice to you guys
people.
should also look up a photo of the guy. He has one of the blockiest noggins I've ever seen in my life, like true like Tennessee son of a police chief level blockheadedness. It's pretty incredible.
It seems like he really did
was
live
like
fast because I think he died at 36 in a car accident when he was like going at high speeds.
A suspicious car accident, we will also say, because many people have looked into it and been like, that seems like a weird way for him to have gone, like flying out of his windshield and everything.
Especially after all of the assassination attempts that were done to him. So he lived a wild
while
life.
He was organizing a deal to star in the sequels as himself, by the way, which is fucking crazy. Like this dude was just this is where you get the cool mix of he is a sheriff and he's a very tough sheriff and they make him into a tough movie sheriff. But the real, like, I think key to the character Yorker is the dude was a fucking professional wrestler. And like the actual guy was interested in the performance of it and the selling of an image and a deal and like actually leading a sort of campaign. And so when he gave up wrestling, where he went under the name Buford the Bull, and he used his tough guy reputation there to move back home and become the sheriff. But he was all about he has an interest in the symbolism of like being a tough guy waging a very public and political one-man army crusade against all of the real life Southern mobsters who were running moonshine and running prostitution rings and gambling rings and all of this kind of stuff. And yeah, he was famous for going around with a big stick and just beating the shit out of them. And yeah, it was almost assassinated anywhere between 10 to 15 times if you believe the reports about it. So it's pretty fucking crazy. Yeah. But that's just it, is that his life is so interesting, and the sort of exploits that he went through are so, I guess, kind of like modern and gruesome that's kind of been the appeal to the movie. And Pauline Kael famously wrote like a glowing review for this film that I tried to hunt down, but fucking New Yorker, I was only able to find like the first page of it. But I do think that this is one of those rare times, because most of the time we sometimes bag on Pauline Kael a little bit, but if there's few things that she got right, it was Brian De Palma. One. Nailed it. Good job, Queen. And I also think she kind of got this one right. Her review for this was calling it the birth of the street Western in the pages of the New Yorker, where she said that basically it used the landscape of the traditional Western and all this sort of noble masculine values and sort of like mythic mass culture folk art that people were sort of nostalgic for a guy who's going to really stand for good and evil and American democracy and virtue and a moral strong man who's going to get the job done. And all of these sort of scared and defenseless people who live in the town have someone to lead them against the destruction and corruption of America. But the thing that she really got at was she talked about how all those old iconographies and the way that people watch them, it gave you a little bit of a safe distance from some of the events, because you aren't familiar with horseback gunfights. You aren't familiar with, they're used more symbolically, and the emotional connection you have with them was a symbolic one. And so she felt that by kind of updating the character's use of violent force for the types of situations that people might actually see in 1972, 1973, and the more modern sort of gruesome crimes that he's dealing with, and trying to maintain like that old square simple formula while and making something rousing and cathartic, but like the old Westerns, but having the dude fucking get in, bash people's fucking skulls open, have people get headshot and blood goes everywhere and get horribly disfigured, as we'll talk about in the film. And I do think that there is a really cool mix that this movie ends up of having of those two things that really make it sing.
Yeah, I think the use of Buford Pusser as like a Southern legend of 70s filmic folklore even is like a great thing, because he's, as you said, started as a wrestler, so performance is always in it. And then a couple other notes on this. We talk about the big stick. I know you guys didn't take American history classes in high school like I had to, but do you understand the reference of like the big stick ideology in America?
I don't think so.
No,
not me. No,
I don't think I do.
No, this was Theodore Roosevelt. This was like a huge thing about the foundation of, I guess, 20th century American policy. Was Theodore Roosevelt loved going around saying when he was like the governor of New York and then the United States president, saying, "Speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far." And
I have heard that.
He claims it was from an African proverb, which there is no proof of, which is, first of all, hilarious. But it's so like funny. About just like showing everyone that you can beat their ass. But
now, was Theodore Roosevelt actually a logger, though, is my main question.
Oh, see, that is the great literalization of it. But the thing is, the very clear irony is so obviously lost on the real Buford Pusser, unless he's doing some sort of grand performance art where in 1973, America in Vietnam was as far from the big stick policy as you could possibly get. And I just thought that was really funny that like how are people not just like making that's the clear metaphor of the movie as satire almost without the characters even knowing, and it's insane. But also the other thing about him being a legend of the South is that you guys talked about these types of movies making Reynolds a star, but when he became a real megastar and they were just doing like Smokey and the Bandit, the cop in that is Buford T. Justice, a satire of Buford Pusser. And like, that's just, I don't know. I just love his folkloric presence as just a hateful, violent sheriff who used to be a wrestler and carries a big stick.
Yeah, but this movie is very, very in favor of his mission, because I mean, part of it is like, you know, what I really like is that it does walk that line between doing this very old-fashioned kind of nostalgic formula where you do want to kind of cheer for this guy, and people did cheer for this guy. This ended up becoming, as friend of the pod Will Sloan described it in his review, the silent majority blockbuster, earning $40 million on a budget of $500,000, ending up getting sequels, a TV show, a fucking remake with The Rock in the 2000s, which fucking sucks. They did all of this circulating through word of mouth, and apparently like a genuinely rapturous audience response that made them confident enough to put it in wide release and run a campaign that read, "When was the last time you stood up and applauded a movie, America?" Which is just like crazy, considering obviously how brutal the content of the movie is, but like
constantly too.
But it is using that sort of shocking brutality to emotionally involve the characters, and Joe Don Baker is trying to bring a kind of charming personality and a little bit of a emotional dimension to this character and his experience, and it's just so funny to think of this now, I think, as such like a rapturous piece of filmmaking, because it's so, for me, you get to the end of it, that final reel is just, it's downbeat. You're like, Jesus Christ, you're like, put it to an end, and obviously the sort of modern gruesome luridness of it definitely makes you even a little bit uncomfortable, even when you're supposed to be in favor of this, you know, forceful mission where he is going to correct things and make it right. And part of that contradiction is in Karlson, because part of that New York Times profile I read with him, where they were doing it after it had already kind of become a bit of a hit, and he was like really feeling himself in the profile. He was chain smoking through the entire interview, and at the end he basically bragged about getting into a bar fight with someone that started with a woman like hitting him with her purse that had a gun in it, and her thinking about like choking her out and then barely crawling his way alive out of a bar fight. And he tells this story to be like, "You think my movies are gratuitously violent? They're fucking real.
This is real,
you know,
baby."
and he actually says that in the profile while talking shit about The Godfather and The Getaway as pop movies that were romanticizing criminals. And he was like, so he really believed in this kind of conservative fantasy and kind of message of the movie, and the desire to, you know, unite around a leader restoring law and order. Though he admitted that it wasn't meant as like a call to extrajudicial violence, because he was like, it's meant to be rousing and everything, but he even notes that it was like, you know, his wife's head gets fucking blown off, and you know, he gets horribly disfigured, and you know, it's not a great, you know, thing to do in that sense. He's just like, it's sad that someone has to do it, you know. That's where that kind of visceral and primal element of the movie is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely on the movie side as the audience is intended to be. When I said satire earlier, I guess what I meant was more like, with hindsight, the irony of critically watching this movie, because obviously it's not played as satirical, but in reading this movie from a historical hindsight is what I meant. But I think that that's what makes it so impactful, because you can't have that fully removed. You can't have a director criticizing a subject and also having the subject be as just like brutally impactful as the Joe Don performance in this is.
Totally agree.
But and what's funny to me too is that it does kind of like lull you into that experience, because we'll get to it, but this eventually does go full John Flynn mode, and you know, John Flynn directed obviously The Outfit, which we've talked about on the show, and also Rolling Thunder, which we talked about on the show, which is like one of just my favorite sort of like 70s exploitation revenge kind of grindhouse movies, which was
and a true like cousin film of this, if there was one.
Oh, absolutely. Totally. There's no way that John Flynn wasn't taking a little bit from this. He was kind of like, how do I take a Paul Schrader script and turn it into Walking Tall? Like, that's what that movie is. And to me, that there's something even a little bit more ickier about that, because Paul Schrader obviously has so much kind of empathy about the sort of loneliness and alienation and the kind of torture of those characters, of the Vietnam men. And, there's something so crazy about building to a cathartically kind of cleansing violence and having those guys kind of heal and bond together through the violence that they do in that movie. But, the very much the gruesomeness and the sparseness of the revenge action exploitation angle occurs in this movie. But what I kind of like is that it does start you in like this kind of hokier, kind of friendly, like country western, like TV
Super
drama dramatization of this guy's life. Like, you do think this is just, this is a nice biography of like a guy from Tennessee. Or, you look at Joe Don Baker, he's just moving back into his childhood home in Tennessee and leaving that wrestling bullshit, behind, because it's just a one-way street that leads nowhere. And he's moving his 2 kids and his wife, Pauline, played by Elizabeth Hartman, who was one of the Southern belles in Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood's The Beguiled just a few years earlier. And he's moving the whole family in with his dad, Carl Pusser, played by, as Eddie already mentioned, Noah Beery Jr., who was a Howard Hawks guy. And he plans to start a logging company with him, which is a very hilarious and important detail for where he gets that stick. But everything about like the opening of this, it's idyllic. Like the twinkling score, the white picket fences, the sky, the family German Shepherd running, the fucking station wagon just barreling down the highway.
And they're just like, as they're driving, he's cuddling his wife. The kids are all smiles. They run up to their grandma and grandpa, like just incredibly excited. They have this like the one kid has a good line where he's like, "We're getting a house that doesn't move." Just because they've been on the move for so long because he was a wrestler. So it's super sentimental and super idyllic, and it's just it's a beautiful thing. And then it turns into the most violent movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, because despite the trappings of his innocent hometown where he played football with his buds and he worked the land, he's quickly informed by his wacky old school buddy Ludi, played by Ed Carl, that his old favorite bar is now only for senior citizens. And the McNairy County has all the, big city crime and gambling vices that he might miss from his professional wrestling days, not knowing that he's moved back to get away from that. And I think he even calls it a shopping mall for sinning. They're like, dude, we got all the sins here, dude. And Joe Don Baker's face just becoming so sweaty and upset at the sight of all his old buddies like engaged in backroom craps and cards, and the girls are walking around and when their nipples can be seen through their shirts, and he's like, this is really upsetting. And when he catches the house cheating, that triggers his frustration to have a way to actually manifest physically, which is this very meaty, bloody brawl with the house employees when he catches them. And I just love how blunt and ugly the first fight is, and how that kind of establishes the way the violence is going to be through the rest of the movie, just using his raw, like, tough bastard strength to like throw people through shit and bash their faces in. And they eventually subdue him and fucking put a knife to his chest and just start slicing his chest open a bunch of times and leave him bleeding on the side of the highway.
And even with the family, they kind of established that he does feel that the right use of violence is okay, because there's a scene where the son is being shown the cocking of the gun that he has, is
very
rifle.
Important scene.
And he's like, well, I got a gun at 9 years old, so I mean, and he's almost 9. I think he's like 8 years old. And he says something like, "There's nothing wrong with
the right
guns
hands.
In the
a gun
right
is
hands.
good," or something. Yeah.
So right away you're established, like, and he's teaching his son this. He's teaching his family this. He's talking about the philosophy with his wife, and so you just kind of understand exactly what he's going to go for when it comes to justice right away. And this is before the big brawl. So.
Yeah, and he's but he does recover from those injuries of almost dying, and I do like that when he gets, he finds out that the Sheriff Thurman, played by Gene Evans, is actually the deputy sheriff in Billy Wilder's Ace in the Hole as well, and has a pretty sizable role in Sam Fuller's Shock Corridor, if I remember correctly. when he's talking to him, Joe Don Baker's just squinting and yelling up a storm at this dude. And he's just like, what do you mean those guys were just blowing off steam, as like the ordeal that they just described. And he's like, well, we got no reliable witnesses to verify your side of the story. And he just views this obviously all as cowardice and resulting in what has changed his town. You used to walk tall, man. Yeah. Now you crawl, and that's what we're...
I was going to say they also mention his Marine background from before he was a wrestler there, like that he enlisted in the Marine Corps. And that's when the line is dropped, a normal man wouldn't have made it through this. And they're saying it's like basically the fact that he was not just a wrestler, but also a Marine. And this is, of course, 1973, contentious time for American military kind of stuff. And that kind of gave him the superpower of survival. It's like, and that's obviously a recurring theme in so many exploitation movies of this era. We were talking about Rolling Thunder earlier. That's like the number one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those military guys coming home and what kind of lives they lived after. It would eventually obviously become everyone's favorite Sylvester Stallone character, Mr. John Rambo.
Oh yeah.
But one note about sort of Buford and I don't know if this was true of Buford or not. They do try to explicitly make him like a civil rights guy. Like he's not as racist as the Deep South guys are, and he's reunited with his old pal Obra, played by Felton Perry from RoboCop, who joins him at his dad's logging company. But his dad's like, I don't want to hire this guy. He's all educated. He's caught the social disease of black power, as he puts it, and And for Joe Don, he's like, what's wrong with that? Yeah. And eventually he makes him his deputy, and he's just like, I can't be your deputy, man. These guys aren't going to listen to me. And he's just like, I want a diverse police force of guys bashing skulls. Well, and also it's Obra. Well, sitting with Obra is what gives him the idea to shave the big tree branch into a blunt log weapon while he's standing there. I wonder if Theodore Roosevelt ever did that either. Took a knife out and just started.
He also kind of because it does seem that Buford has this mentality of like he can take it all on himself. And Obra is one of the first people to tell him, like, I think he says something like lone wolf is prey or something. And he should actually try to build kind of like a group or a community that will help with this, all of this injustice. And then there's some things that happen in between, but eventually he gets to the point of being like the sheriff and kind of creating his own police force and things like that.
Happen in between. Dude, it becomes a Southern courtroom drama in between.
Yeah. Yes.
It's like one of the craziest sections of the movies where he's like, this idea of standing up against the brutal, corrupt bullies is just kind of occurring to him. But his first idea is a very simple, like if they would just let him get away with it, he returns to the Lucky Spot. He, where the barroom brawl went down, and he starts bashing heads with his stick, and the hits are brutal. Like when he hits someone, bam, blood packs burst out of the back of their head. He starts breaking arms and legs, and faces every which way while drenched in sweat. And Joe Don Baker is like, he's making it very physically extraneous looking, and he gets both his buddy's money back and also the money for his medical bills from the bookie. And he basically even says like, look, it's not a robbery. The bookie actually tries to give him all the cash at one point. He's like, no, mister, just the money you owe me, because he's such a nice guy. He's just like, no, I'm just getting, I'm making this situation right, which they obviously claim was just an insane man walking into their establishment with a stick and committing assault and battery and armed robbery. So he has to answer for that in the actual Tennessee courts, where, he denies their bullshit guilty plea deal. And, he finds out that his friend, who was his other witness, has actually already been killed. And so he decides that he's going to represent himself on the stand in one of the most ridiculous call to arms conservative fantasy moments I've ever seen realized on the screen, but is so beautifully performed by Joe Don Baker.
So yeah,
where he goes, you don't want to get in trouble, represent yourself, and then take your shirt off as part of your testimony.
Oh,
it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen, where he's like, I did not go there to commit a robbery, but remind them and these thugs that you've let rule this place for too long, that there's a little law and order left, and but in terms that they would understand, that they can't buy or bribe their way out. He just rips his shirt off. He's showing all of his chest scars, and he's showing it as a point to be like, if you let them do this to me and get away with it, then you're giving them an eternal right to do the same thing to any of you. And you just have the judge being like, order in the court, like, put your shirt back on, and he immediately 5 seconds later, not guilty.
Oh yeah, it's hilarious. They even mention in a bit of dialogue where they're just like, it's only taken them 5 minutes to decide or something like that.
Yeah.
Like they just were they're like, that was the most passionate speech I've ever seen.
That's the silent majority, man. They all went, do you know what? He's speaking the truth. I am tired of these thugs who just slice chests open and dump people on the sides of the highway and do moonshine and
and speaking
play craps. They're really upset about them playing craps, honestly.
Yeah.
And speaking on the violence too, like when he rips his shirt off, just like, they got the blood packs and all that, and the blood impacts in this are absolutely insane and way over the top sometimes. Even from a punch in the face, somebody will just be covered, like their entire mouth. But when he does rip his shirt off, there's some like awesome, they put like makeup on his torso, so it has like extra skin and you can see all the cuts in it and everything and the scars, and it looks wild. It almost looks like it's like Passion of the Christ but on his stomach kind of thing.
It really is. And that is a very apt comparison, because that is where the American Christian conservative brain goes right there. It's like, that's the guy who's standing up for
martyr.
Not our sins, but for the sins of the thugs.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
In 1973, Jesus was Joe Don Baker, and everyone loved him.
That's right. Jesus with a big stick, baby.
Yeah.
And before
Jesus had a big stick, if you remember correctly. It's called the cross, baby.
That's right. And before this too, with the scene, before the trial, he's with his family when he gets arrested, and it has like kind of more injustice, and it's starting to introduce more of the cops being very corrupt and just uncaring and in the pockets of the corrupt criminals. And they have a bunch of lines that just imply violence, where he's just like, if that dog moves, shoot him, because he keeps barking at him. The one, they suggest that the whole family is violent because the daughter gives him a little push when he arrests her father. It's quite the scene. And but yeah, then it leads into the trial thing.
Yeah. Well, and his official kickoff campaign for sheriff, which obviously Pauline is very not happy about, because she's so happy that he's retired from wrestling and from violence. And, again, there was that unseen where she was very uncomfortable that he was showing the son everything to do with Grandpa's rifle and all that kind of stuff. But, and Chodan has, he does make this transition like a little bit more sensitive in terms of his performance than like another tough guy 70s actor would do. Like, I feel like he was just like a little bit more like pleading to her emotionally about how unsafe they're going to be unless they do this, and how he needs to have this done. And he also does so sometimes in the writing in a little bit of a playful way. There's one incredible moment where Pauline, he's saying that Pauline should take the kids out of town while he fixes the town into being decent again so that they can actually live there. And she's like, why don't you just wait for this to blow over? And Joe Don, just in a very southern, like, it won't by itself, honey. Someone's got to huff and puff. And that is ultimately what he's gonna huff and puff, and he's gonna blow this town down, which mostly starts with him just like hanging posters up at the bars, and eventually getting into a pretty sick car chase with the sheriff. With a giant pusser for sheriff bumper sticker, on his truck, and then charging them with like this big game of chicken that he plays with them. And this is the one like big kind of like car stunt moment, other than later when the guys are taking shots at him in the cars. But from what I understand, it was the stunt driver Kerry Lofton was doing all the stunt driving for them, who is the guy super famous for Grand Prix, Bullet, The French Connection, Duel. Awesome. Like all of those car movies were ones that he was doing the driving for. And actually that's where they got the cinematographer from as well. The very TV-esque sort of coverage plus brutal exploitation, blunt violence. It's Jack A. Marta, who also did Spielberg's sweaty highway chase movie Duel, that Lofton did all of the driving for. And so that's when you start getting like those elements start appearing a little bit more in the film.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. In the real history does document that the sheriff did die in an automobile accident. It doesn't say in the thing like if it. I doubt it was what is shown in the movie, but I do kind of find it funny. It just mixing all of the history together to make like the sheriff character and in a sense making it the real life thing. Have him be so corrupt that he would try to kill Buford, but Buford is just
and then just
so
kill himself by crashing the car. Yeah.
So, I don't know. I find
and having Buford save the deputy sometimes. Grady, played by Bruce Glover, and pull him out of the car, but he's unable to save the sheriff. So they try to bribe the deputy into testifying that say Buford ran you guys off the road and murdered him. That would be able to get rid of him. All of the evil scheming by the community is actually a little bit cartoonish and very funny.
Oh yeah, because it's not just like 3 major heads doing it. It's like they have 50 people in these group meetings dealing with like the what they're going to do to deal with
we
certain
see
people
more
in
of
the
them
town.
than the actual town, so it kind of just feels like the whole town, every civilian in the town is against him at a certain point.
Yeah, it does feel like
it's almost like the inverse of Roadhouse, where Ben Gazzara kind of owns that whole town in Roadhouse, and then in this one it's like a coalition of small business owners, which kind of makes sense for this.
There's some more Roadhouse connections too. I also like Joe Don Baker giving his big speech about his rules, about how he operates. Both guys get to pull that move. Although you got to give Joe Don Baker a little bit of credit for succinctness with his rules, which are: number 1, we enforce the law equally. Number 2, any man caught taking a bribe gets his head knocked off by me. And that's it.
He's literally just like, if you go against the rules, I will kill you. It's hilarious that's like his boss maneuver. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is funny that like at first his mission against, to bring honesty back to the town and to stop all this corruption, his things make sense, and you're like, oh, he's making Oprah his deputy. He seemed like a nice guy, and he even thinks that it's going to like upset the racist member of the town. And so, there's like a little bit of like a progressiveness to that idea. Mm-hmm. But then it's just like, the brutal physical force of how he does it is just so uncomfortable, even if you're like kind of like vaguely like he's kind of right, but I don't know. There's something, like when he starts demolishing the like White Lightning moonshine distilleries that have been like poisoning and killing the locals, which is a really gruesome scene where they show you all the bodies of the guys who drank the moonshine and got killed by it. But yeah, just the brutishness and the violence and the sort of law breaking that he does in order to pull it off actually does get addressed in the movies, where the judge is even like, his arrests aren't holding because you're not following the books. He's like, dude, you're not even following the basic technicalities of like reading people their rights, and like everything's just getting completely dismissed. He's like, all you know is force and violence, and there's more to law than swinging a big stick and knocking down the doors, which I will say does trigger a very funny gag where Joe Don Baker literally grabs the law book and he's like, I'm gonna read this tonight.
One of my
literally also what
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna
Eddie.
say this just real quick. That's what Abe Lincoln does in fucking John Ford's Young Mr. Lincoln. You see him grab a prop.
That's right. I forgot about that moment. That's awesome.
One of my favorite moments.
Joe Don Baker. He's Jesus. He's Abraham Lincoln. He's all these guys.
He's America, baby. It's one of my favorite moments is when he's just kind of talking. He's talking back to the judge, and he's just like, all these rules are causing it so that we can't bring justice to the town and all that. And the judge is like, this isn't some small thing that we've established. This is like coming from the Supreme Court. You can't do this. This is unbelievably just against people's rights. So you got to stop. And I think it's so funny that the whole movie, even though the judge makes like perfectly good points in that sense, the movie still like resists that, and
they're like, oh, this fucking nerd,
so in a fun way,
fucking nerd.
Yeah, exactly. You're just right there, like, oh, shut up, Supreme Court judge, whatever.
He's winning hearts and minds. Exactly. Come on, man.
Exactly.
You gotta let him go. Like, and even the criminals are. I think one of them at one point they try to buy him off, and they explain, ideals and realities are very far apart, and one day you're gonna realize that, son, and if not, someone will point it out to you clearly. clearly as like a, you know, sort of a vague threat. And it does eventually start to have some pretty gruesome consequences on him as well, because there's a leak in his department. And so a lot of his plans to catch the criminals are being thwarted. Although I will say the montage where they get thwarted, one of the funniest exploitation movie montages I've ever seen in my life, where he's just funny. Like every scene where he goes in where, you know, they open up the back of the truck expecting to find moonshine. There's a bunch of watermelons, huge zoom out, and the guy going, it's just watermelons. Another one where they burst into the club with guns, and they go in expecting them to be like playing cards and drinking moonshine, and all the guys, instead of playing craps, they're playing ping pong. And they're all drinking milk, and they all raise their glasses of milk and go, another big like shocked zoom. It's like, it's genuinely like gag heavy, and I was like, dude, Phil Karlson's having the time of his life right now.
Yeah, that felt like something
the
that we'd be
for
watching
it was so
with
flaccid too.
Sorry, Eddie, go ahead and repeat that.
I was just going to say the setup for it was like so flaccid too. You almost know it's not going to work. They're like, oh, we're going to bust literally everybody right now with 30 seconds of screen time of preparation. Like,
oh my God. Yeah, it's a hilarious hilarious gag.
It gets very not hilarious very quickly though, because like they're doing gags about how this is going wrong, and then they're like, well, what if we actually just fucking shot him though? You know, what if we just like like straight up like mob hit style pull up to him and, you know, have him walk over in the car and shoot him in the gut and kind of leave him for dead, which he survives. And I think that Jodan Baker's performance gets a little bit more interesting at this point in the movie, because he's been playing it, I think, fairly charmingly and sensitively, but the transition into the kind of hysterics and kind of rage that he gets into after getting shot and realizing that, you know, the gun is mightier than the stick, I guess, in this particular scenario, and he's like stewing in his hate for them. I love that scene when all the local business owners have like sent him like flowers and whiskey and cigars, and to be like, get well soon, you know, Mr. Jodan, we didn't try and just murder you. And he's actually like drinking and smoking the cigar, and he's just literally, he's doing it out of like bitterness to be like, you know, like I'm going to indulge in these vices that these guys are sending to me. And it does also kick off this incredible interrogation scene where he beats he finds, because he realizes he was betrayed by a mole in the department, and he finds out which deputy it was and who's been ripping them off and everything, and so he kicks the shit out of him, and then in an extended scene I don't think I've seen before, he threatens to blow him up with a stack of TNT that they're using on a moonshine distillery. And Jodan's fucking psychotic mugging facial expression while he's threatening, he's like, I'm gonna press this down and you're gonna blow up, and he's like, you better fucking tell us the truth that you've been, you know, giving them the tips, and it's so long. Jodan makes that face for so long, and I'm like, dude, he's fucking lost it. Like he's literally just like, he's gonna start blowing people up.
And he makes the cop just like get to a point of like, he's in absolute tears, begging for his life. He tells him
crawling towards him.
He humiliates him. He adds just, you know, insult to injury. It's unbelievable to watch it. And he's still, even though when you're watching it, you're like, this is a lot. This is quite a bit. The movie still paints it in this very like, yep, this is what's necessary to bring goodness to this town.
That's why I liked the movie so much, because the movie is dealing so much in like you know that what the filmmaker believes, you know what the old formula is telling you to believe, but the 1973 genre filmmaking model is making you go, so ew, violent. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's so aggressive.
And that's kind of the beauty of the movie for me.
Yeah. And
I love that like 20-minute chunk where he's just a psycho and he gets really into smoking big cigars and he's like really sweaty, and he's like that face you described. He's basically making a slightly toned down version of that face for 20 minutes of the movie or so.
Yeah, he was making me think about like Norm. These are the kind of faces I feel like Norm would make if he was freaking out, you know? So it was a blast, but in between doing shit like that, I'm like, dude, you're obviously escalating the situation. And he's like, well, what if but he's still a family man. He's still a sensitive family man. So, he's playing Monopoly with his kids, for example, when one of the scenes kick off, and the goons come up to his house with guns and just start shooting into his house while he's playing Monopoly. And he, at this point, he's finally decided the stick's not good enough. I'm gonna keep a gun. And he gruesomely shoots those guys on his lawn, but not before they shoot his German Shepherd. And you get this horrible moment of him crying and like holding his like bloody dog in the house and just crying. Oh my God. It's so horribly sad. And that really does trigger like the final like 20, 30 minutes or so are just this incredibly downbeat, like the cost of turning into the guy that you were being, even if the movie kind of believes in your mission, it's like it's coming, there's something arduous and, just like really unbearable about trying to actually pull this job off.
Yeah, because oftentimes it's they have a scene where he does something that is still for the justice and the good of the town, or so he thinks. And like for instance, the scene right before the family gets the attempted murder and like the drive-by shooting, basically. He goes into the bar and they're like, "Do you have a warrant?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's in my shoe." And then he kicks open the door to reveal like all of the illegal liquor and smuggling and all that shit.
See, those were the moments where 1973 America was like, "Let's fucking go."
Yeah, oh yeah, I was like, "Let's fucking go, dude." That he just kicks it open and reveals like he's like, "Look it, I knew exactly what was behind that door." And then the moment after is when the assassination attempt happens. So he's constantly doing these things, but then it instantly shows you what the consequences are, I suppose.
Yeah.
Man,
well,
that scene where they shoot the dog is so haunting because they bring the dog back into the family living room and they're all just like sitting around on the couch like they're watching TV, but the dog's bleeding out and Joe Don Baker's fucking sobbing. Like, I don't see him cry in this movie. Like when his wife gets, spoilers, when his wife gets fucking domed, he just becomes stone faced.
And this is after, I remember, like after this is when he goes into that kind of like hotel room place or whatever, and they're just
where they're whipping and beating a naked woman,
and it's and then of course he's like, well, fuck that, and he starts beating them up and everything and threatens the girl that's in charge and whatever. But it's just
one of the bar owners just tries to shoot him when he comes in at one point, and he fucking like domes her at a Christmas party. Like it's so ridiculously gruesome. Like and you said, with twice in the skull and then in the eye. And like it's so brutal, and it becomes such a rough movie to watch and an uncomfortable movie
Granted, they
to
do
watch. And I don't know. There's something that I liked about how kind of truthful that ended up being, where it was like, even if because could you imagine like watching Dirty Harry and Dirty Harry's wife gets domed and he cried or something? Like that's not something they would ever put that kind of character into that situation, because it's just so depressing and it's so kind of runs counter to encouraging someone to actually do this. The catharsis of that gets a little bit interrupted, and there's something to me that's really special that this movie does do that.
Yeah.
That weird scene where he rescues that girl who's being, as you said, described being whipped and stuff, that character named Kelly. He then refers to what he rescued her from as quote unquote white slavery. And then just like kisses her really long and soft. And it's like, all right, dude, they shot your dog, not your wife, yet. But like, it's like a weird thing. Like it almost should have been re-edited in a different order to make more sense, because his wife's still alive when he makes out with that girl that he saves from white slavery. And I just think that's a hilarious like exploitation movie element of this movie as it gets into its most harrowing parts.
Oh yeah, they always love that girl that tags along with the guy. Like Rolling Thunder has that whole aspect to it too, right? So, But also I knew that something was I was looking at how much runtime was left, and I was like, there's no way that we're just back to the beginning where he's picnicking with his wife and kids. And, you know, I was like, this doesn't make sense. They're trying to like lull you back into like a moment of comfort. But after all the gruesomeness that we've went through, I just don't believe you. And even the music is trying to do that too. Like it's getting very twinkly and kind of romantic. Yeah. And I looked this up. Eddie, did you know this was Walter Scharf who did the music for this? Who I haven't heard a ton of, but he did every classic Jerry Lewis movie. I was like, why is he on the music for this? That. Yeah,
I did. You know what? That is news to me. That's crazy. It makes sense. There was definitely that classic Hollywood feeling to the like homestead, wholesome scenes in the beginning and what it teases at there at that idyllic picnic with his wife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude. If you look up his thing, he did Nutty Professor, Ladies Man, Court Jester, Bellboy, Errand Boy. Like he did a lot of.
That's crazy.
And he did some Elvis stuff too. Wow. So yeah, either way, very, very strange, but it works really well for that moment of being like, you know, trying to lull you back in. It just didn't work on me because I was like, no, there's no way this movie's just not trying to get a shock out of me. And I might have also read up about the guy a little bit before I watched it too. And I was like, the wife has not been domed yet, which is, you know, about to happen when they're doing another drive-by shooting occurs in a crazy action beat where they're all hanging out of the car with like machine guns shooting into his car. And he actually keeps like, they actually shoot her in the back of the head to start the set piece. It's not like it happens at some point in it. It's like, no, the wife just gets shot in the back of the head, just gets brutally pushed forward into the car. And then he gets into a little bit of chase with these guys before hitting like a classic like Burt Reynolds fucking or Hal Needham ramp and getting his way away and then trying to be like, you know, is she okay? You know, like, and I was like, dude, she's not. Like her skull is fucking, the front of her head is gone. And apparently in real life, according to the Phil Karlson New York Times article, like her head was actually like clean off. You know, by the you know, and just Joe Don Baker, you know, her just being like, oh, Buford, it's such a beautiful day, followed by him holding her mangled corpse and just, it is stewing in. Yeah, I mean, he's at the point where I don't even think he can really sob anymore. He's, you know, it's so horrible. And he's, you know, obviously he's been shot too. And he's actually like crawling towards her and stuff like that. It's really harrowing.
Yeah, as soon as the wife looked at him during the picnic and was just like, I'm so proud of you, and I don't have any fear anymore. I'm like, okay, we're fucked. This is about to get so messy.
Yeah, that's what you say when you're like on your deathbed, you know?
Yeah. Like, it's just like you have just set this character up for such an extreme death. Oh my lord. And yeah, just him completely collapsed and just holding her, like barely moving, like he almost looks dead himself, is really sad to see. And it is something that I don't think you'd normally see from this kind of character. Like, I don't think Charles Bronson would have this kind of scene in his, you know, macho movie. So it is, I think it really does what separates, you know, this film from some of the other movies that we've watched that are very similar.
And do you know what also separates it is if Charles Bronson had a scene like this, it would be in a Death Wish movie and it would be in the first reel, because this is what sets off his righteous revenge. There's something so interesting about having the revenge being done throughout the movie and saving the huge reason for it as this like sobering downer of like a funeral march of a last like fucking 5 to 10 minutes or so, where like he's in the hospital, his face is horribly disfigured, he has a cast on that makes him look like Hannibal Lecter with his kid sitting next to him holding a gun, being like, you know, the violence has been passed down to his child and he's taking his kids to the mom's funeral.
Yeah, they actually have a scene where the son is like going down the hospital hallway holding the gun, and it looks as if he's on a mission now to go kill whoever killed his mother. Like it's wild.
It genuinely makes him look like a horror movie monster toward the end, like beyond Hannibal Lecter. It's like a slasher villain, you know, someone with a morphed face that's gonna get you in the night. It's pretty hilarious, and it definitely adds to the more distanced viewing of a 2024 viewer who doesn't exactly align with the silent majority ideology. It just like it it compounds that gross feeling like so hardcore at the end, and I love that about it.
One thing I also did like is I mean it's just to kill you even further, make you more sad, but they actually pay a lot of respect to the wife with the funeral. Like they have it's a much longer scene than I think is necessary when they have the march of the hearse, and like people, all the townspeople are following it, and the cop force that he's made that is supposedly the good force is following it, and he is as well, and it's it just takes its time. It takes its time with the burial and the funeral, and it feels like the movie's trying to pay respects to the wife.
Yeah, more than you would expect. That's what I mean about the weird like emotional dimension of the movie, and even the structure of the movie. To have all of this be like, you know, just compounding consequences and gruesomeness, and like it, even if it's like trying to be like, this is what we need someone to sacrifice like this to wake us all up and to get the job done, it doesn't actually make you want to be the guy who does it.
Yeah, no, not
which
at all.
is, you know, different than other vigilante justice sort of revenge movies that they would make, where it's like he just is the coolest guy and he gets the job done. It's like, no, this guy's life is fucking horrible. And you know, even and it does make Joe Don Baker's performance like a little bit, you get it a little bit more swept up in it, because like when he's getting a little teary eyed at the end after I will say running two guys over with his car because he just bursts through the fucking lucky spot, like a full on like a Hal Needham car stunt where you're just driving through the fucking bar and running those two guys over. And you know, all of the town starts coming out after and taking all of the items out of the bar, the card tables, the bar stools, and putting them on a bonfire. And they're all being like, we're standing up to all of this crime as a community now. And the fucking Johnny Mathis theme song kicks in where he's like, why can't we stand and join hand in hand? And you have Joe Don Baker behind his fucking Hannibal Lecter mask just crying in his car.
Yeah.
Dude, I hate how serious it's played because I laughed so hard. And again,
I did too. And in 1973, you have to imagine people standing up and being like, I am moved. I would
be the guy that people write a think piece about for being inappropriate with laughter in the theater, because, you know, my Alabama hometown theater, everyone was solemnly standing at the end of Walking Tall, and I was going Cape Fear De Niro mode.
I did get a little bit of a read too, that he felt like, you know, I think he's happy about like the townspeople, you know, rising up and burning all this stuff and whatever. But there is a bit of, because of the mask, it almost feels like there's a defeat in his eyes as well. Like he's had to go through so much sacrifice. And I can't tell if it's just because he's wearing like half of a face cast, but it definitely feels a little bit also defeated, as well as like proud that his town rose up to the occasion. But he's gone through so much at this point. Like that is the difference in kind of martyrdom with his character compared to some of the other macho guys. The ones that we've usually seen are kind of like they have that, like, I'm a martyr and I'm willing to sacrifice myself for justice, but they don't really show a lot of that sacrifice. And with this one, it's just constant. Like, yes, we may disagree with some of his practices and the way he goes about things, but you understand at least his willingness to take, like, really just risk his life to do what he thinks is right. And that is very convincing, at least. So I do love that difference in the idea of martyrdom with his character.
Yeah, it's trying to give you both things, right? That's what's very interesting about it. You have an old Hollywood guy doing an old formula, kind of some old formula storytelling. And yeah, so some of that is making its way through, and clearly did, you know, like so many people responded to this and found it genuinely rousing. And although I do love that it gets so ridiculous and gruesome and exploitation-y in its second half, that by the end of the movie, they're not just saying it's suggested by certain events anymore. They've added a whole nother line to this is a fictionalized account with fictitious characters and incidents, and none of this is meant to refer to actual persons or, you know. And it was just like, yeah, we might have lost some people on the biographical elements of the movie between where it started and where it ended, I think was their thought.
yeah, exactly. It does definitely stretch the truth. But again, I am, like I said at the beginning, I am kind of shocked at what is true. That kind of shit is pretty wild. But
yeah. It's also true. But yeah, I think maybe pivoting towards reductive rating round here on Walking Tall. This one ended up getting the solid 4 from me. I thought it was, a very effective 1970s update on, again, what we've been talking about, this sort of old school Western strong man on a moral quest to lead the defenseless against all of these corrupting and destructive forces that are intruding upon their town. And, I think Joe Don Baker is a huge reason that I end up really taking to this, because he's playing obviously such a ridiculous character who is also a real character, this wrestler turned sheriff, and he does it in a very sweaty, physical way. He really nails the transformation on his face, all of the fucking mugging he ends up doing when he starts going full psychotic, and all of the sensitivity he has in some of the family sequences, all of the situations he's put in that other tough guy heroes wouldn't have been put in, like the horrible sequences that result in him sobbing and going to funerals, and just the kind of stuff you just couldn't imagine Dirty Harry going to, for example. Joe Don Baker responds to those, I think, very, very well, and makes the character. It really does give the character a sympathetic, emotional dimension, which, I mean, some people could find troubling because of the things you're meant to be sympathizing with and the things that he is trying to put forth in terms of the, conservative law and order messaging of the film that really took with people in the 1970s. And the movie is arguably, maybe not arguably, I think it is a little shaggy and overlong.
Yeah, a little.
But it doesn't have that Phil Karlson 90-minute magic of, being really, really lean that some of the, for some of the movies that I've seen from him. But it is cool to see an old Hollywood legend who really does actually have like B-movie formal skill and do the sort of no-frills kind of blunt force filmmaking that he had, but doing it for a different era of filmmaking, and seeing him respond to Dirty Harry and seeing him respond to the sort of regional outlaw, dirty exploitation actioners. And it does kind of walk that line between like being a movie that's like really uncomfortably violent and, very ripped from the headlines in terms of gruesome modern crime context, but also adhering to these old simplistic and sort of nostalgic formulas. And yeah, I really did find I got a lot out of that whiplash, and it felt like the movie was indulging in that whiplash deliberately, that it wasn't just like, whoops, we accidentally ended up kind of making this movie. And I found the swapping between hokey country western TV drama of him and his family and all the folk hero aspects, and the actual disgusting and traumatizing levels of exploitation and it gets to in the violence. Like, it's very lurid, it's very downbeat, which for a piece of like mainstream Americana that like actually took off and became a blockbuster, that to me is kind of amazing and kind of unique, and definitely makes the movie appeal to me. And especially anyone, if you're like me, you're a huge fan of John Flynn. I had not seen this before, and I'm a huge fan of John Flynn, and I went, dude, this is John Flynn's music. This is his shit. I was like, dude, did he steal this shit? Because I was like, I already knew he worked with Joe Don Baker after this movie came out. So I was like, dude, if you're someone who really loves Rolling Thunder, like I do, this is like an essential watch. And I think, a huge reason that movie exists. So yeah, solid 4 for me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think this is a solid 4. I think Joe Don Baker is just unbelievably good in this. I think it might be my favorite performance from him now. I've seen probably like 9 or 10 movies of his. Usually it's like he's not the star. It's usually he's playing a character, like a side character of sorts, but he's always memorable. But he just has such a confidence to him, and with Phil Karlson's directing, honestly, it feels like it's convincing because it's so committed, even though I would disagree with a lot of the philosophies in politics. I'm just kind of like, I don't give a shit. When he kicks that door open and says the warrant's in his shoe, I get stoked. I get pumped up.
Yeah.
He's crashing cars through the buildings to take revenge on people without like any concern for who's in there. Like if
doming old ladies who run bars.
It's unbelievable. And it also has a very
ripping his shirt off and fighting for himself in court.
It's passionate. I get convinced. I get swept up in it, and it's a lot of. I mean, it's not It is fun, which is strange. I think it's just because of the era that we're looking back on that you can kind of separate yourself from some of the
I mean, dude, I was gonna say it's just like
harrowing.
Roadhouse, where it's nice until it's time to not be nice. It's fun until it's time to not be fun.
Exactly.
Is this movie?
Exactly. And but it has a very natural feeling. Like there's actually lines of dialogue where you can see the actors, including Joe Don Baker, kind of stumble a line, but they keep it in, and it just feels just more natural. It feels more grounded in kind of reality. So I think even though in a lot of places it isn't doing that. So I think that, I don't know, that mix of things is very interesting, and I think it oddly balances it all well. And but honestly, I need to check out more Karlson, because this was the first movie that I've seen from him. So I haven't seen any of his like classic noir stuff. So I'm going to go back. He's great. Yeah, 4 out of 5.
For you, Eddie.
I am also going to go with the 4 out of 5 on this one to pick up where Jamie left off on Karlson. I think this is, it's not like my very favorite movie of his, but it's up there. And I think looking at it through the lens of him as a director really helps with my main takeaway from this is that it's one of the last films that you could call like a transitional film between the classic era of B movies and the exploitation era, because the exploitation era had been underway for quite some time now, but with those holdovers like Beery and directing, Karlson and all of those elements, it still feels like it has those contradictions of old Hollywood in a new Hollywood world. And those are a lot of my very favorite movies, to be honest. So I really think it like fits like a glove into that, but in the exploitation world rather than mainstream Hollywood. And that's why it's like the B movie, the exploitation movie version of, I don't know, stuff like Chinatown or any of Robert Altman's work in the 70s, where it's in conversation with the classic Hollywood era version of those genres. This is just like the B side of all of that, and Karlson directing lifts that so much for that element of it. So yeah, I just think that this is like also on its face a really fucking fun B movie. If you're out there with the stopwatch, you might say it's too long and oddly shaped as a drama, but you know what? It's just more time to luxuriate in the milieu that's so well realized and the entirely too much mugging by Joe Don Baker that, like quantifiably too much, but personally, it's never enough.
Agreed.
Yeah, I could have watched more scenes of him smoking cigars and threatening to blow moonshiners up with dynamite. I wish there was an actual like the montage that precedes it, where it's all the cops getting laughed at for going into places that they think they're gonna get the guys, but they set something up for them. I really wish there was another montage with Joe Don Baker just threatening people in different ways, like the TNT scene, but 3 different times. But yeah, so that's the director's cut that I want. Yeah, and for anyone who's interested, I haven't watched it yet personally, but I immediately watch listed this movie called Framed, which I guess is Phil Karlson's very last movie, which came out in 1975 and is also a Joe Don Baker starring film, because they had such wild success on this that Phil Karlson was kind of trying to re-up and make some more money. It ended up being the last movie that he made, but a lot of people I trust say that it's just as good, and has him playing like a gambler who gets like framed or something and goes on the run. So more Joe Don Baker and Phil Karlson is open to you if you enjoyed this one as well.
Definitely
more Karlson gambling too. That's a recurring theme throughout a lot of his movies. You'll see a lot of illicit gambling going on in Phoenix City Story as well, and 5 on the House, one of the great like old school casino movies.
Cool.
Damn.
I'll have to watch this.
So yeah, go check it out. But I think that is going to wrap it up here for Walking Tall. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about, finally, Roadhouse. Stick around.
This is my town. I'm not afraid of him.
I guess you'll be having that fire sale now, all right?
You got your hands full, kid.
I just think I'm looking at a dead man.
Patrick Swayze.
For that line of work, I thought you'd be bigger.
Gee, I've never heard that before.
Roadhouse.
All right, we are back and we are talking Roadhouse, or as Jonathan Rosenbaum called it in his review from the time. Eddie, do you know this?
No, what did he call it?
Walking Short. I think due to...
Dude, I'm not about that. As a 5'7" man, fuck off.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he was maybe referring to Ben Gazzara's height, because I don't think Patrick Stewart... Patrick Swayze. He's a, you know... I mean, there's a recurring gag about how he's not that big, but we'll get into that.
That's true. That's even in the dialogue.
But anyway,
right now.
More erect.
Roadhouse is the...
That's not bad.
No, it's about my height, you know?
Yeah.
It is the
Josh
1989...
as an under 6 foot manlet.
Oh, no. But it is the 1989 American martial arts Western hangout film directed by Rowdy Herrington, produced by 80s action maestro Joe Silver, written by Hilary Henkin and R. Lance Hill, and starring Patrick Swayze as the philosophical and educated black belt bar bouncer or cooler who functions as a neo-Western cowboy mercenary by the name of James Dalton, who was hired to clean up the rowdiest shit-kicker Midwest Missouri bar called the Double Deuce, and finds himself in a similar sort of one-man army war against the corrupt business rulers of the town that Joe Don Baker and Walking Tall was in, and who don't want to see the town or the bar cleaned up. And alongside Swayze, there are a bunch of supporting turns we'll get into, like Kelly Lynch as the doctor love interest, literally called Doc, Sam Elliott as his aging Silver Fox mentor who taught him all of his skills, and of course Ben Gazzara, as I mentioned, as the villainous like Missouri country club mob boss warlord asshole, all rolled into one, who rules the town, which we will talk about. But this is our second time talking about Mr. Rowdy Herrington. You have that name. You were destined to make the movie that you made, sir. This is the first of which was his debut film only 1 year earlier before this, called Jack's Back, which was his first script that he ever wrote while working as a best boy and a gaffer on a bunch of 1980s movie sets, including Repo Man and A Nightmare on Elm Street. And it was a reasonably stylish and silly, like Diet De Palma take on a Jack the Ripper copycat serial killer procedural movie, with James Spader doing double duty in a sort of like twins melodrama role, and at one point actually straight up ripping off Manhunter, like diving through the glass to like stop the bad guy. It has like an 80s music video kind of stylization to it as well. And apparently that got him decent enough reviews that he landed an agency, and that agency also repped Patrick Swayze, which got him that Joel Silver call. Who when I was listening to an interview with Rowdy, he said that when he got the script, he actually didn't really care for the script. He was like, you know, and Joel Silver said it's broad. You know, he said, I make scripts for 13-year-old boys. You know, he's like, he literally said that to him. And he's like, awesome. But you have talent. And he's like, I think that someone like you is what this needs. I need someone to punch it up. I need someone to see the things that are wrong with it, maybe fight against some of those things. And so it has an interesting path to being made that way. And Herrington does have talent. Like when we watched Jack's Back, we got the sense that he had chops behind the camera, that he had a feel for, you know, being playful and being controlled. And obviously he had been in the camera and lighting departments on so many sets that when he got to make a movie, he was like quite confident. He knew how a set worked. He knew what he needed to get on his days. He knew where he could take time. And the only thing that really didn't maybe work with Jack's Back was just it got a little bit awkward and messy. And there were a couple maybe generic stretches that he could have fixed up, and a little bit of, you know, but neither of these movies really have perfect tonal control, I will say, but in a rewarding way. And I think in here, he really just did find his calling, because he saw this material and he was like, this is a broad, vulgar, caricatured pop action movie by the guy who makes commercial action movies. And he was like, what if I just fucking leaned into that? And he was like, what if this was a primary color cartoon mixture of like old romantic Western hero formula storytelling, some of the same things that, you know, Walk Tall was responding to, but the dusty like saloon hangout qualities? What if those were updated for, instead of the gruesome 70s exploitation, it was like the 80s blue collar dive bar and bouncers who have nationwide mythic fame, like cowboy gunslingers. And in the 80s, it's more what was more trendy in terms of politics. It was more of like an anti-Reagan sort of like class politics and the mulleted like neon music video male melodrama and sincerity and vulnerability. I mean, something like Tom Cruise's Cocktail kind of comes to mind as another movie that tried to kind of milk that, that era of filmmaking, and not just because Kelly Lynch is the love interest in both either.
And it's a lot less, like, it's trying to be a lot prettier too, in a sense, like just a lot easier to look at. Like, you have Patrick Swayze. I mean,
it's shot by the god, probably your guys' MVP cinematographer, Dean Cundy.
Baby.
I feel like he's probably shot more movies that you guys have talked about than any other cinematographer.
That might be true.
That might, yeah.
Just between doing
Carpenter,
so much
Spielberg,
of Carpenter
Zemeckis,
and Zemeckis, yeah.
I mean, right?
It wasn't that long. 1 year before this, he did fucking Roger Rabbit. Like, goddamn. Yeah. Speaking of a cartoon.
Yeah, like there's such a difference between, Baker and Swayze, in the sense, like they're playing the same kind of tough guy with, their own rules that they're going to stick by very strictly. But Swayze, of course, has the pretty boy effect that Baker doesn't, and they utilize that in such, honestly, very funny ways, because this is kind of a time capsule in a sense. You were looking at it as a very specific era. And this has to be right. This has to be Swayze's defining role, I feel like. I mean, like, I love him in Point Break, and I think that he pulls off an incredible, like, all of the romantic surfer bro, like, longingly staring into each other's eyes, and the like adrenalized extreme sports versions of Cop and Crook, like, action set pieces. He nails that movie. I even like him when we talked about him in Red Dawn, the John Milius film, when he's one of the the child guerrilla soldiers. He's like the older brother. But he's also got Dirty Dancing and Ghost, which were massive.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say Ghost might be
the big. I mean, Dirty Dancing is the big thing, because more so than the films we've talked about him in, when he kind of did lean more into maybe getting some action chops. This movie, 100%, they cast him because of the romantic heartthrob status he cultivated in Dirty Dancing, especially too because they were like, look, he's very physical because he's a dancer, he's a dance instructor in that film, but he's also got like that sensitivity to him, and obviously that movie was a huge hit, and he got a fucking Golden Globe nomination off of it, but you could also tell that they were like, look, on the one level, we are doing a very pulpy, comically exaggerated end of a mixture of the regional American outlaw crime movie and like some Hong Kong martial arts, and they're like, look, we're not going for the bleak 70s exploitation version of the outlaw stuff. We're gonna go for like the goofball stuntman antics of like Hal Needham, just if Hal Needham had more throat tearing and monster trucks and various things that we'll get into. But it's very clear that they were like, in order to counteract that, they were like, what if we had like a guy who kind of has like that polite appeal and who actually does have like some gracefulness to him, because fundamentally he's playing a tough guy bruiser character, and he's being put in a situation that, like, I don't know, fucking Mifune is put in Yojimbo or Cooper in High Noon, and it results in someone having to come out of that and be a tough guy. But there's a balance where everyone views him as an outsider, sort of city slicker pretty boy, as Jamie put it. But he also just has when he eventually unleashes where all of this mysterious intelligence and swagger is coming from, it's in convincing bursts of like actual athletic and weighty violence. And there's a few actors who I think could pull both of those things off as well as he does. Like when he starts eventually brutally killing people and doing these shirtless, amazing stunts, it's just like he really does kill it while also maintaining a sense of vulnerable sensitivity in the performance, while he's playing a guy who, the central contradiction of which is that, philosophically and morally, he is at odds with the thing that he's really good at, which is unleashing beautiful violence on screen for our entertainment. and that, it's something that is a tragedy to the character and we get to delight in, and which is what makes this movie such a fun watch.
And unlike with Baker too, his philosophy is more like violence should be done as a last resort. Now that still results in a ton of fucking violence and brawls, more than I've ever seen in any movie, it seems. But he does kind of initially have that. Like one of the first interactions he has is a guy is being really aggressive towards a woman. I think he like kicks her over the stool, and he comes up and he's just like the other bouncers actually start kind of roughing him up, and he's like, nope, just let him go, let him calm down, give him a second chance. And then as soon as he turns his back, he like threatens him with a knife, and so he's like, okay, well I guess we got to take this outside. But he's trying to de-escalate, and that's his general philosophy. It almost never works, but it is there.
Yeah, I mean, he's a man full of contradictions, and that's what makes it so great. And we talked about Buford Pusser as like a Southern legend, right? Mm-hmm. I love the character of Dalton as just a legend of bars across America in the world of this film. Like, so totally. This is a guy who went to NYU to study philosophy. He's from New York. He's like a New York pretty boy who has a BA in philosophy, and from his philosophical roots got really into Tai Chi and meditation, but has also cultivated a nationwide reputation, not as a bouncer, but as a cooler, as a guy who calms down
wrangles
bouncers,
the bouncers.
I guess.
Yeah.
And he's
keeps them cool during violent situations they might have to deal with, It's important to them.
And he's acquired such a reputation that a man flies across country to persuade him to come across country to help fix
Mr.
up
Frank
his
Tillman,
bar.
played by Kevin Teague.
Yes, and his bar is the Double Deuce, which needs a lot of help, which is, it's so funny how he's hired as the cooler, but he's basically just the manager of the bar. Then also he does a transformation on the bar, that owner guy, very quickly. It's like within 20 minutes of screen time, Dalton is the king of the bar, and the bar has become a very generic 90s chain corporate bar, because this is like this is one of, in my opinion, the last 80s movies. Like there's so much 90s Hollywood stuff coming up through here, and part of it is that like corporate look of the bar that it takes on. But anyway, I just love the specific like mythology of this movie with, he rolls up to the Double Deuce, and the bar has to play behind a fence because people are so violent, and you have to scoop up blood and eyeballs at the end of the night.
It is such a filthy like shit kicker establishment, the Double Deuce that's in Jasper, Missouri, that he gets called to. It's an absolute blast, and he does eventually argue out of that guy, I'm going to get $500 a night. I'm going to get all medical bills paid, and he's going to drive straight there, and he's going to get to work. He does. I love that.
Like he's in control.
That's what's really important about him, because his rules stem from this kind of personal philosophy that he has cultivated along with his reputation, which I like that Jamie highlighted, because it is so important that that other than the fact that he's not as big as anyone ever thinks, which is a recurring gag about his reputation, because everyone I guess thinks he's Arnold Schwarzenegger when they hear about, like, that's how you know everyone that he's a fucking badass, but he doesn't quite have the stature of that. But he's so cool that despite being so good at violence and having a black belt in karate alongside his fucking BA in philosophy, he is reluctant to deploy it and doesn't want to hurt anyone, which is tied to, this guilt-ridden backstory we'll get to about how he killed a guy in Memphis he unknowingly cucked and then ripped his throat out in self-defense, which is the funniest backstory I think a character has ever had in a movie.
It is very funny. He's like, I accidentally fucked someone's girlfriend and then had to kill him. I'm so distraught about it. It's very funny.
Yes, and it's you have to assume it's part of the reason he's tried to become more zen and kind of composed and done his Tai Chi sunset workouts that he does.
He also has a bunch of moments where
why.
He also has a bunch of moments where women come up to him and they're hitting on him and like actively. One of them at a certain point even just says like, "You want to go back to my place and fuck?" Like it's just that aggressive, and he's always just kind of just pushing him to the side, trying to be a gentleman about it, whatever it is, and that's part of his zen too. He's just like he's only gonna date the woman that he's focused on and loved, which we will get to, but yeah, it's
yes. Well, and not only that, he like there's an aspect of him where he tries as best as he can to maintain this philosophy, but when it's time to, when push comes to shove, he will drop the politeness and he will be skillfully brutal and not nice when he has to be. But it's very important for the good of everyone else, as like a sheriff or a marshal figure in a Western, not for himself. He personally loathes and avoids like direct mano a mano, violence, and he actually tries to explain to everyone that it's not personal, and anyone who is personal with violence and is sadistic or abuses it or forces it on him, he hates that person, which is gonna because he's been around the block and he's seen it all. He has two big quotes that kind of sum him up, which is that pain don't hurt, and somebody's got to get paid to do it. He kind of, it's interesting where he so distastes the idea that this violence exists, but he's realistic about its existence and goes, if someone's going to get paid to stop it, I might as well use my skills and kind of get paid to do it, which is what ends up taking him to the Deuce, where you get the wonderful Jeff Healey band performing the blind white boy barroom blues rock with a lot of sick lap steel guitar soloing, and that will soundtrack basically all the parts of the movie that aren't Michael Kamen's action score. And I do love Eddie's note is spot on. The fact that they're behind the fence playing so they don't get assaulted is a hilarious like wordless gag, and even better is the gradual removal of the fence. Like it gets a little bit lighter, and then at a certain point it's just gone, and they're just like, as the bar is getting cleaned up, there's less bloody fights breaking out left and right, and drugs being sold, and also guys letting girls get motorboated on the for money at the tables, which is like one of the weirdest, like grossest moments in the movie.
That is straight out of like a typical 80s sex comedy. I love that they were able to throw that in there. The guy where the guy says he'll let you motorboat his wife for $20, and the guy just starts grabbing the dude's wife's breasts, and then he's like, well, aren't you gonna kiss him? He says, well, I don't have $20. And it reminds you of like Western brawls, like all those the bar fights in Westerns and stuff like that. And I just really adore that. And his process of like holding court while cleaning up is so good, because he's this guy who all he has to do is say that he has a college degree and like have a certain level of confidence in the way that he speaks, and he's a billion times smarter than all these fucking hicks at the bar. And so he's able to
all
just
of those bouncers are like
them.
Destroying the bar more than the guys who are being disruptive, trying to police it, which is one of the funnier details that he has to respond to right away. Although probably the funniest gag about, speaking of Eddie's point about like sheer like old Western barroom chaos, the funniest gag for me every time it happens is just the sheer number of beer bottles that go flying and smashing around any given shot. Like they actually start ignoring them at a certain point because it happens so often, and every time Swayze has to casually duck out of the one that would have like nailed right where his head was in the frame like a second earlier. It's so funny, and
he does it so smoothly too. Like he's not doing it like he's panicked. He's doing it like, oh, I've dodged 1 million bottles to my head, it doesn't even matter, that kind of thing. He's still kind of very zen. But yeah, the chaos of the brawls are honestly so funny as they go on, because it appears like they happen every night, and they're usually for some stupid reasons. Like you said, there's the boob gag, and there's a couple other ones that we can get to, but just the actual destruction of the bar every single night. It feels like they'd have to just rebuy every single table and chair for the next day, knowing that they're going to destroy those again, because there's just
there's almost a violent Rube Goldberg quality to that first one, where like one guy throws an object that hits someone, who throws a fist that launches someone through a table that pisses a guy off sitting there, who then like kicks a guy. And it's worth noting, the main thing about this movie, I mean, there's lots of stuff to love about it, but the stuff that would make or break this movie in another version of it, if they made it like they did this weekend, that we'll probably talk about at some point, it also just helps that the stunt fighting craft in this movie, for especially in the 80s in the United States, is fucking spectacular. Most of the actors are obviously, they're doing their own stunts. They are legit comfortable enough with each other to kick the actual shit out of each other, including Swayze and Sam Elliott and Teague, who we'll get to, who get a lot of the biggest fights. But the stunt coordination was done by Joel Silver Regular, Charlie Pacherny, who has worked with Tony Scott and Michael Bay and Michael Mann and McTiernan, and the movie that he would have done just before this movie was fucking Die Hard. So Joel Silver brought him on and loaned him essentially to Rowdy Herrington and said, if you're going to do some action scenes, this guy can probably help you figure out how to do them, since, you know, you didn't really do a ton of them in Jack's back. And it was Pacherny's idea, so huge credit to him too, in order to train and help get the choreography done, he brought in Benny the Jet Urquidez, who was a karate black belt, a professional kickboxer, and who had done sick fights in Hong Kong with Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung in movies like Wheels on Meals and Dragons Forever. And he is who gives the film the controlled choreography that is not seen that often in American action, especially around this time. In the 90s, it kind of became a little bit more popular to steal from Hong Kong. It wasn't quite happening yet. So this is like a really big deal that people were watching like fights that could be held in these very still, medium wide shots where you can see the precise hits, you can see the precise techniques, and even Pacherny said that every single henchman was trained in a different fighting style, including jiu-jitsu and taekwondo and kickboxing and judo, because so he was like, no two fights that you see, even in the background of a scene, will be the same, because people will be fighting different guys with different styles. And like, these are the small choices you make in a movie like this that really do make it incredibly special. So having those two guys involved, and then as Eddie mentioned, Herrington, who had worked on one of his sets before as a gaffer, he brought in Dean Cundy, who had worked with Carpenter and Zemeckis. And so to combine that kind of stunt craft with Cundy, who just had such, or Kundi, I guess, who had such clean widescreen framing and elegance that he was so famous for, and making sure just every ridiculous piece of in-camera bodily and environmental stunt destruction Jamie was talking about, that not only is it big, like Joel Silver style, it's also framed and blocked for clarity and impact in ways that some Joel Silver movies sometimes weren't. And you can also tell Kundi, he's loving doing the Western pastiche, you know, sort of photography that he's getting to do, where he shoots Swayze and Elliott like macho demigods. Even and I kid you not, I couldn't believe it when I looked up who worked on this movie. Even the editors of this movie were loaned from Joel Silver, and they were the guys who cut Die Hard, Commando, and Predator, and the composer's the guy who did Lethal Weapon and Die Hard. So it's like the entire Joel Silver 80s macho action excess squad was on loan to like a sophomore director. And like, it's so crazy that movie has that crew to just shoot barroom fights, which is, I think, part of what makes people so crazy about this movie, about how ridiculous it is, because it's like, it seems like it should be a smaller movie, but it's made by like legends of people who know how to shoot big explosions, huge gunfights. And it's just, it makes the movie that much more sensational for me.
Yeah, and I
mean, in terms of fights, there's only a few that don't have other fights going on in the background. That's what's so great about it. Is like the fights that actually are part of like plot points or whatever don't have background fighting going on, but all the others do. And then it's like, that's what makes the film sing, in my opinion, is, Josh, what you were just saying, the combo of the stunt choreography and the cinematography, like both of those being able to background everything while basically comedy is being foregrounded, is so incredible. And it's like the perfect mix for an 80s action movie that you can just watch over and over.
Yeah, because they, like, eventually too, we get to more details of it because it is later on, but once like Sam Elliott is introduced, they do have that very like sentimental brotherhood kind of thing where they even in the camera work, like there's one shot where Swayze's kind of pissed off and he's hitting this like wood plank piece he has set up in the farm and or the barn, and Sam Elliott comes in and they kind of have a little bit of an argument, and they do this big close up where he spins around and tries to punch him, but Sam Elliott just catches his hand, and then he's just, you know, they have this like brother moment where they lock eyes and shit.
Fucking man shit right there.
It's like,
no ladies allowed.
Exactly.
Yeah, truly, no. Those guys would be happy if they could live in a house with no ladies and maybe even be married, because the homoerotic tension between these two guys is just like off the charts. And it's also, the thing is, it's not just one note, because it's also a brotherly bond, a mentor-mentee Bond. But man, the way that they exchange glances at their glistening bodies while exchanging platitudes verbally and calling each other mijo is just like, it's beautiful. And it's just so flagrantly like 80s style Hollywood gay coded. And I love it for that. That makes the movie so much better even.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, because it all just does actually kind of lend itself to a sort of a heightened emotional, almost like dream world that you operate in while watching a guy clean up a bar. Like that's literally what this movie's about. Like it's crazy to think about how over directed this movie is, and that is like what is the movie. Like if it wasn't over directed, I don't know that the like that is what makes the movie like appeal to everyone, and what has made it have the kind of ridiculous kind of hyper masculine action reputation that it has, which obviously some people have tried to then posit as like bad or camp. And
the so bad it's good thing with this movie, I'm like, that's ridiculous. The direction
it was nominated for Razzies.
Crafted.
Fucking Ebert called it like a good bad movie. And I was like, fuck you.
I hate that shit.
No, the over direction of this, what it accomplishes is it makes cleaning up a bar seem like the most important thing you can do in America. Like it's like nothing exists outside. It is, by the way. Ripping out a guy's throat is the most important thing you can do. But like it makes it seem like nothing exists outside of this town, which is what classic Hollywood movies were so fucking good at. And new Hollywood movies stopped being good at because of location shooting. And like location shooting is great. That's a big part of what made New Hollywood so inventive. But like, I just love that this movie is shot in the suburbs and greater Los Angeles area and is just like, no, this is a town in a version of the US where bar fights are the new epidemic, and that is all that you know about the world. And that's what the over direction gets you, and that's why I love it. It takes its concept so fucking seriously that it's not laughing at itself, it's inviting you to laugh in pure joy with it.
Yes, it's gleeful and nonsensical, but the maximalism and the explosiveness is like I could see why some people would go, oh, it's like a parody of this or something. But for me, it goes so deep into doing that it really does wrap back around to just being mythic and to just being big and being, I love that quality.
And the insane part of it that works so well is like you have all this crazy direction in the beginning where it's just bar fights and it's just, setting up these simple relationships and whatever else. And because it's so well directed and kind of, over directed, overproduced or whatever, by the time you hit the last 30 minutes where there's full like fucking house explosions and the amount of corruption and assassination attempts that are going on are just insane. You actually believe into that transition. Whereas I think if they didn't, go so balls to the wall in the first hour and a half, that would just seem incredibly silly. And it is still silly, don't get me wrong, but just the direction of it and the pacing of it and the transition is very smooth, honestly, and you just buy into it. And it's amazing. It's very fun.
Well, and I do just love the appeal at genuinely how small scale his mission actually is. That it literally just is Swayze dressed in all black in a tight fit, being like, this bar is not going to have crazy fights and we're not going to sell drugs in it. And like the first things he's doing is like firing the angry, like temperamental bouncer right when he takes over, who gets that hilarious exchange with him. I heard you had balls big enough to come in a dump truck, but you don't look like much to me. And he's just like, opinions vary, and then he fires the drug dealing one. He fires the guy who raw dogs on his break. He fires the guy skimming the bar
he's
till.
Raw dogging an underage girl too. Like it's a very quick cutaway gag where, remember, that girl is like getting her ID checked and the guy's like, this is a Ralph's card, and then he comes in, he's like, nah, they're with me, and then that's the girl he gets walked in on with.
Okay, that's even worse.
Using a fucking grocery store rewards card.
To be honest, at first, because I actually forgot about that detail, so now I'm definitely glad that got fired. But at first I'm like, oh, Swayze, come on, he is on his break. I mean, he is on his break. He's not lying, but now, fire that guy.
It depends. If it's an unpaid lunch break, sure,
exactly.
And he also gives his big speech to all of his bouncers who remain about how his operation works, which is like, one of the big moments of the movie where he's like, you have to follow 3 simple rules. 1, never underestimate your opponent. Expect the unexpected. 2, take it outside. Never start anything in the bar unless it's absolutely necessary. And 3, you guys know it. Everybody knows it. Be nice. If somebody gets in your face and call you a cocksucker, I want you to be nice. If he won't walk him, but be nice. I love. It's so good.
His philosophy of just like, it's a job, so stop taking it so seriously. Like, these are people that are just drunk and saying ridiculous things to get into these fights to begin with.
Yeah, being called a cocksucker isn't personal, man. He's like, no, it's 2 nouns combined to elicit a prescribed response. And I want you to be nice. Yeah.
I've reused that line so fucking much. It's 2 nouns prescribed elicit a prescribed response. That's like my excuse for everything I say. Like, look, man, it was just 2 nouns. I was just trying to get a response.
It's so funny. And his basic philosophy is just de-escalate as much as you possibly can. Now, I do understand that the setup...
Be nice until the last possible second when it's time to not be nice. And these are revolutionary tactics and philosophies in Missouri and to the dudes.
And only he knows when it's time not to be nice. That's the best part.
That's important, too.
He's just like, you're not going to know. You are just going to get your ass chewed out by these, like, verbally assaulting drunk guys until I decide it's time.
And every single one of them, by the way, has a knife of varying sizes that gets pulled out. It's a recurring gag. How many knives get pulled out?
And that's the thing with Dalton is usually once the weapon gets drawn, that's when he decides that it's over. But there are other moments as well where he's done, like, his scale of when he decides not to be nice is a little bit uneven sometimes. And so I could see as an employee of his,
he also just clearly likes to be a show off, though. I don't know if you guys got that vibe where it's just like no one else can do the not nice part. He's like, I get to do the not nice part. Now he's also incredibly skilled, and he's like, I've never lost a fight. So, in some ways he's like, I'm protecting guys who might get hurt if they were to get into a fight. But it's also like, I'm going to let a bouncer get punched and then stabbed a bunch of times. And then I'm going to come in and grab the knife from the guy and then shove his face through a table. Even though I was just telling the other guys who were breaking the bar that, that they were not taking the fight outside was, a problem that they had to be fired for it.
And that's the thing too, is that the bartenders, when he's saying this, and I think they might have said it even a little bit after, they're like, these people in this bar are like, some of them are massive people that will take on all 3 of us. You know what I mean? Like, so they're genuinely worried for their safety. And so when he's telling them to just like completely be nice and just almost let them get punched a few times, you kind of understand how they're fearful of that and just like, is this really what we should be doing? And again, his inconsistency on when he decides to do it is just what makes that very funny.
Yeah, but the tactics and philosophies, they do start to work, and the Deuce does start to get cleaned up, and we do get a couple views also outside of Jasper that he has to consider in kind of his off hours and what he does outside of the bar, where we see him renting a gorgeous streamside cabin loft inside a bearded Midwest farmer's like horse stable, where he intends to spend his evenings shirtlessly reading Jim Harrison paperbacks and doing sweaty Tai Chi that the movie briefly actually does just romantically stop to observe his beautiful form. And the farmer, speaking of guys leering at each other, the farmer even looks at him and goes, God damn, like as much as the ladies do while he's doing his Tai Chi. He also, Swayze, a little gift for the ladies. He's full ass cheeks. He's got him out, it's for all the ladies who have to sit through all the vulgar titty bar elements. Which apparently, by the way, Rowdy says were all Joel Silver requests. He was like, I couldn't not film them. Joel was producing, and he said that I make movies, literally, he said to Rowdy, I make movies for 13-year-old boys. So that's what you're putting in the movie. So he does that. And he also, one of my favorite details of this section is I like that he buys a shitty used car, but completely wordlessly without explaining why. And in a series of visual gags as the movie goes on, it's due to him anticipating upsetting all of these members of the bar in town who like don't want the bar to get cleaned up. And obviously for all the people that he's going to fire on day one. And so he buys a shitty car. He's okay with them vandalizing and destroying. And so there's so many scenes where there's a full fucking stop sign in his car. They're fucking putting knives in his tires and everything like that, which is how he starts to meet some of the frustrated and scared local business owners of the town. Because I think it's the local auto parts store owner, Red, played by Red West, who I looked this up and I still don't know if I believe it. He was Elvis's bodyguard and taught him karate. What a weird guy. What a weird. Yeah, that apparently that's karate. Yeah, apparently that was his deal. There's a lot of interesting sort of like color character stunt casting in the side. Like there's the LA punk musician John Doe is one of the bartenders. Mm-hmm. There's pro wrestlers and football players who are hanging out. Obviously, Jeff Healey is a real Canadian musician as well. So either way, there's tons of personality and color to this community that they deliberately want to show you that he's getting involved in and kind of learning to like, because they want to reveal that this town is being robbed and destroyed by various goons of this local wealthy mogul and crime boss, and basically wannabe Western land baron, who is Brad Wesley, played by the legendary Ben Gazzara, who's from Cassavetes films, Bogdanovich films, and obviously would land a similar role in The Big Lebowski due to this film, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about where Swayze settles in, you neglected to mention that he happens to be staying across the stream from Ben Gazzara.
Yes, I did forget to mention that. The big helicopter shot of that. Why does that farmer have a beautiful loft right across the pond from the fucking, like, the millionaire?
This is one of those movies where the entire world is this one town, and everyone knows each other. And that's that classic Hollywood touch. It's amazing. You don't question it. Ben Gazzara in this movie, maybe my favorite performance of his. It's definitely up there. Lines like, they brought J.C. Penney here because of me.
Yeah, he's a fun
while he's sitting in like a Miami Vice like villain mansion, you know, like and smoking cigars in his pink bathrobe, having his sexy late night swimming pool parties. One of the best scenes I've ever seen is just Ben Gazzara singing doo-wop while swerving over a highway line in his ascot and hat.
That shot of him
kills me every fucking time.
Oh yeah, I laugh so hard because it's really what it is his reaction. At first, like he's just swerving and he's just being absolutely reckless, having fun, whatever, and then Swayze is approaching and he just goes right off the road because of this guy, and you almost think like he's gonna react, like he's gonna look back and do something, but he doesn't. He just keeps smiling and keeps swerving, and the like just the apathetic nature, he doesn't care at all of what he just did was so funny to me, and I was laughing my ass
off. He's like, that's his fucking road, dude. Get off of it, you know? And he has like this perpetual smirk. He has like a twinkle in his eye. Like Gazzara's really going for it as this cartoon evil, like capitalist villain who just like hates weakness and delights in hurting people. One of my favorite bits is that monologue he gets to Dalton later where he's like, where Dalton is, you know, confronting him about his relationship with the town, where he's like, you know, you've gotten rich off the people in this town and they're good people. And, you know, he's like, and you bet your ass I have, and I'm going to get richer. And, you know, I believe we all have a purpose on earth, a destiny. I have faith in that destiny, and it tells me to gather onto me what is mine. And he's like, and then it's where he brings up too, he's like, you know, you get paid for beating people up and tell me you don't love it. Of course you do. You know, you wouldn't be human if you didn't. And that really does speak to the contradiction that we were talking about with Dalton, where it's like, you know, he tragically doesn't love violence, but he has to do it. And when it's done, it's the most beautifully, lovingly, gleefully filmed violence you've ever seen in a movie. So the movie has that contradiction as well, and it's awesome to kind of give him that line where, you know, he straight up mentions that. But yeah, Wesley ends up on Dalton's radar due to how obviously he just mistreats the town and was part of clearly the rowdy chaos that took over the Deuce in the first place, in part literally because he sells them their alcohol, and the skimming bartender was also his fail nephew who tries on a few different occasions alongside Wesley's like martial arts goon squad, which is one of my favorite things a villain can have in a movie.
Absolutely.
he tries to get his job back by force, or at least like disrupt Dalton's operation to fix up the bar, which is, you know, is going well. People are more clean cut. He has like a fucking velvet rope line to get in. You know, he's got a fresh new neon sign. Everything's going well, but the nephew's attempts are so funny to me. Like the one where he whips out a giant fucking Bowie knife before screaming, "Come on, chicken dick," and then just getting thrown through the second story window in the owner's like office that like oversees the bar, which is the set piece where we're first also meet the chubby goon, who's one of my favorite characters. His gut just barely being held in by his pants suspenders. And he has very like American Sammo Hung energy.
Yeah. He has one of the best lines later on that we'll get to.
Yes.
But,
the final line of the movie.
Yeah. The final line of the movie that's not a Bob Dylan lyric, I guess.
Right.
True.
If you count music being sang on the screen. But yeah, so I really like the Brad Wesley character too, because it's almost like if we're comparing Walking Tall to Roadhouse, he's more like Buford Pusser than Dalton is, in my opinion, because he's a guy who wants to roll in and own a town. That's like really the bad side of Buford Pusser, is that like he wants to be the sheriff, but he also kind of wants to be like the king of the town. And Gazzara's character here does it through capitalistic means rather than policing means. And that's like the kind of twist on it, is like, that's been around since old westerns. But yeah, the fact that it's Dalton being called in to clean up a bar, and then it's just this guy, this kind of venture capitalist type dude who is just like owning the entire town's economy, being the villain, I feel like is kind of a newer twist for the times or whatever. And yeah, I just love his obsession with bringing like chain stores and restaurants into the town as a way to show that they've gotten better. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna get 7-Eleven, we're gonna get, you know, JCPenney's, as I said.
Because the difference, the resistance in this movie is like obviously Dalton, Patrick Swayze, but the small business owners as well, compared to the big giant overlord capitalist kind of guy. So it's and that is, I mean, the difference there is pretty funny too, just because with Walking Tall, like that's the enemy. It seems like all the small business owners are coming together to corrupt the town and kill Joe Baker.
As an 80s flip on Walking Tall is what it is, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I do like that Gazzara still technically orders the level of violence that someone like a Buford would do, but it's just, it's again, all of his like martial arts goons who just like walk around and doing various set pieces. I do like the one too, because there's the one where they first come in, there's another one where they come in and the goon who drives around in a giant monster truck rolls up with like a razor sticking out of his boot, and Swayze obviously doesn't let him in. He's like, dude, this guy obviously means trouble. And he's like, no, we're just here for a good time, man. He's like, you're too stupid to have a good time. And he blocks his razor kick, twists his ankle, and drags him by the boot onto like the dusty porch of like what basically, you know, it's almost like it's the 80s equivalent of throwing a guy through the double door like saloon bar, and just kicks his fucking ass out there. And it's just, it's awesome. The fighting is so good.
Yeah, and even within the fighting too, like they have some pretty funny lines. Like I remember one, I think it's Sam Elliott. He's about to punch a dude in the balls because he's like way bigger than him, and he says something like, "I ain't about to show you my dick," and then just punches him right in the fucking balls. It's hilarious. Another thing too,
so many great lines.
I always love watching, like, there's certain movies where it seems it's not the cool thing to do, and some movies where it is the cool thing to do, but there's plenty of nut and there's plenty of kicking and punching of balls, is what I'm saying.
Oh, cock violence.
There's a lot of that.
I was like, where's he going with that? There's not any nutting in this. What do you mean, sir?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to maybe edit that one, but
well, actually, there's not any nutting in this movie. The sex scene is very gracefully cut around. We'll I guess we could get to that, because that's
we should, because it's one of those awesome fighting. One of those fighting set pieces ends up getting him slashed with a knife, right? That's how it works. And that's why he meets Dr. Elizabeth Clay, or Doc, played by Kelly Lynch, who, as she puts it, gets sent a lot of business her way by the Deuce, and admires Dalton's kind of like badass cool and strength. Like, he has a great bit where he carries around his medical record of various stitches and bullet wounds that he's had throughout his life that she gets to kind of flip through. She's like, wow, this guy's kind of a bad dude. But she's also wooed by his unique unique intelligence and an attempt to be nice and a philosophical pacifist, you know, where and it's also where the scene where he delivers the line too, where he's like, do you enjoy pain? He's like, pain don't hurt. And the even better one, have you ever won a fight? Nobody wins a fight. You know, that's a deep as hell, Dalton. But anyway, it's like one or two scenes later.
That line's used in the trailer for the new one. Gyllenhaal says that in the trailer.
Oh, damn. Yeah, it's important line. You know, it's part of his philosophy that no one comes out winning a fight, man. If you have to kill someone, you're going to look bad. You're going to be a monster, which will.
But also, he's never lost a fight either. So it's like, I've never lost a fight, but also nobody wins a fight. It's a very kind of contradictory thing about his record.
Well, because that's just it, is I've never lost a fight, but I'm really sad about that. So, really you know, and either way, she finds that sexy as hell, and one or two scenes later, you know, she sees him doing the job of marshalling and goes out for dinner with him once, and they have a nice tasteful kiss on the first date, and then she comes over to his loft and they have an incredibly strange and elongated sex scene that's mostly an awkward like mounting exercise on a stone wall set to Otis Redding.
Yeah, it's like they do like 5 minutes of foreplay to Otis Redding while they're like kind of in each other's pants and stuff, but it's a very strange thing, and then it just like dissolves to them afterwards, not the next day, but just like afterwards laying out on the deck.
Yeah, and there's a very elegant pan over to the mirror and the window and like the reflection of the bed, and then Swayze wakes up, or she wakes up in the middle of the night, and Swayze is sitting on the roof of his barn naked and smoking. And
he does a lot of, there's so much ass in this, like Swayze ass. Like even when that waitress from the bar comes and brings him breakfast one time, there's a really goofy moment where his ass falls out, and then she's just like mugging so hard about it.
Yeah, she's reacting to it. Well, and everyone's reacting to it too, because even in that scene where Kelly Lynch joins him outside on the roof, and they're both naked, and they start, I think, going for round two on top of the bar. I was like, that's just a little rude to your neighbors. And right when I said that, Ben Gazzara is ominously watching them across the stream in his rocking chair in a beautiful frame of him rocking in and out of like the right side of the frame. God, it's great.
It's awesome. So funny how that's set up, dude. It's like, so they're going at it again, and then basically it cuts to just like him out of the frame and then coming into it. So the reveal that Gazzara is peeping on them is over directed like the rest of the movie, and it just makes that hit so hard and so funny.
Yes, well, and we find out too that there's a little bit of narrative involved in that, not just jealousy. It is you know, like he I guess Wesley had a thing for Doc many years before, and I do like that they just call her Doc. That's such an old Western thing. It's almost like, although it kept making me think, well, she's not really like a Doc Holliday kind of character, so I don't know if it totally works, but it is funny to be like, she's a doctor, so we'll just call her Doc the entire time. And either way, he gets upset having seen that because he likes her, and he decides to fuck with Dalton like a little bit more directly, which he at first does through capitalist means by stopping supplying the Double Deuce with alcohol, which is what forces Dalton to call up his sexy aged mentor dad, Wade Garrett, obviously named after Pat Garrett, which is fucking sick. And he is the gruff, long-haired salt and pepper Sam Elliott, whose career in Westerns goes all the way back to fucking Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where he had a minor role in that, and who is, to Dalton's mind, the best cooler in America, because in the first scene when he comes up to him, he's just like, I've come to you because I've heard you're the best, and he's like, Wade Garrett's the best, and he's like, Wade Garrett's getting old, you know. And so either way, he calls his mentor to be like, I could actually, you know, this place is getting a little bit harder to clean up than like the usual gigs that we do. And even when he calls him, fucking Sam Elliott is like in a military strip club, and he calls it Hog Heaven. Just a beautiful performance, a beautiful man, everything about. He's so cool. I don't know. There's some.
He's got, dude, top 5 flow. I gotta mention it every time it pops up in a movie. The flow that it might be top 3 that I've mentioned on this show.
It's Jesus-like in this one. It is a Christ-like quaff that he's got going on there.
It's insane. What a beautiful
Sam Elliott
man.
is so fucking good in this movie,
and he did his fighting too, which is fucking crazy. Like so sick for him. Now apparently they couldn't teach him like the level of dance like kickboxing and stuff that they had Swayze doing, but because Sam Elliott just couldn't do that stuff. But I guess Sam Elliott had a bit of a boxing background, so they took that and they were like, well, so we're gonna make the same way every single henchman has their own style, we're going to make his style just like street boxing, as Benny called it, basically, where, you know, he's gonna punch a dude in the face so hard that he literally falls into a fucking dumpster. A visual reference, obviously, to the fact that these guys take out the motherfucking trash. Or he's gonna, when he does kick, it's for a street brutal kick of just like breaking a dude's knee or something like that. Either way, Sam Elliott's fighting is very good.
And I love it's kind of the introduction to what Dalton's been going through for Sam Elliott's character. Like, you know, he gets in a fight pretty much right away. He gets into the car of Dalton, and there's that awesome shot where the hole in the windshield just shows Sam Elliott's face perfectly, and he's just kind of like, all right, so this is how it's been going, kind of thing. So yeah, I think his introduction, and then we've kind of already talked about it, but their eventual chemistry together is just. It's
homoerotic affection for one another. It's like great. It is like, and Elliot is just maybe because he looks that good, but he has just an insanely sexual presence for every single scene that he's in, no matter what he's doing. Like whether he's making comments about that gal's got an entirely too many brains to have an ass like that, which is like, that's a Joel Silver line if I've ever heard one. But crazier than that is that moment when they're drinking all night, they're catching up, they're dancing to George Strait, and I think when they're drinking beer just at the bar and catching up with one another about each other's stories, at one point he unzips his jeans to show a scar that he's proud of. Yeah. And he does it just to reveal his lack of underwear and his pubes. 100%. He's like, hey, lovebirds, look at this shit, you know? And you're like, God damn.
And then immediately after that, he like very aggressively, romantically dances with Doc in front of Dalton. And he's like holding her head, like the side of her cheek and everything, and then like whispering sweet nothings and stuff. And it's dude, like
it's where Dalton got the swag from. That's what this whole sequence about.
Yeah. And I do like when she pops up for the first time, Elliot's kind of like, I fucking knew it. So it implies that, you know, Dalton is very much a lover boy from his past as well, and kind of gets him into trouble. Yeah.
I love that they just go to a diner where it's like, I guess you can drink beer here at 6 a.m. while everyone else is having their coffee, you know?
Because
dude, this is Anywhere USA. That can happen in Anywhere USA.
Exactly.
Oh man, it's awesome.
Yeah, but since Dalton finds a way around the alcohol supply by calling Sam Elliott, Gazzara has to take, obviously, his he has to take this shit to the next level. And he does this crazy, hugely violent explosion where he commits arson and takes down the auto parts store in what must have just been leftover TNT from like Joel Silver's personal supply, because it's an absurdly huge explosion, followed by the second major full bar brawl chaos set piece in the movie, where we finally get to meet the evil anti-Swayze of the movie, who I don't know if we've mentioned yet, Wesley's henchman Jimmy, the martial artist Marshall R. Teague, who they knew they wanted to be just a martial artist first when they casted the role, because they were like, he's going to get 2 big fight scenes and we need him to nail those scenes. And he does. I do love that they even in the costuming have him kind of mirror Swayze in like look and stature and skill. He even dresses a little like him with the tight shirts and the jeans and the cowboy boots. But
it's really funny,
he rocks
it's like
sunglasses and an earring. So the earring is an important detail. Sorry, that's the only thing that's, you know, Swayze wouldn't do that. That's what differentiates them.
Well, it's also like the old white hat, black hat thing where Swayze has the more blonde hair and that guy has that greasy black hair.
True.
I love that dude because his purpose is to exploit Swayze's deepest trauma, which is that one time he ripped a guy's throat out. Like, I feel like Gazzara is throwing this guy out there knowing that his throat is going to get ripped out, because every time he fights with Swayze, you see it as if he's like possessed by a demon. His hand just starts wiggling a little bit and he starts getting taken over. And it's like, no, don't do it, Dalton. It's so great. I love it.
It's so, and that first fight that he gets is incredible, which is following the Julie Michaels, like Jeff Healey sort of strip dance routine that Gazzara forces to bring to the Deuce, because he's like, I'm going to take the Deuce back to its disreputable days. And Swayze gets that hilarious line reader. He's like, if you want to have a pet, keep it on a leash. And And that is what kind of explodes the fight that goes down. And Jimmy goes fucking crazy in the big brawl. He's fighting Sam Elliott. He's fighting Swayze. He's using a pool cue, like a pole fighting stick in like a Shaw Brothers movie. He's using it to do like stage backflips. God damn.
It's wild. Like, yeah, you can tell too, like a lot of the time they've set it up where these people can obviously fight, but it's a lot of like just brawling. And then as soon as you get Teague here, it's like this guy is next level.
Oh, yeah. The amount of like athletic roundhouse kicking and flipping people through tables that smash goes up like tenfold when he's in the scene.
Which is kind of cool that they did that effectively, because we've seen so many fights at this point. Yeah. So to actually have a character be introduced and you feel the extra threat there, I think is actually pretty good. So
he's absolutely one of the best henchmen of the 80s, like without question.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's the genius of the movie in terms of tone, is that it narrows itself down. It starts with really broad barroom brawls in wide shots with 8 brawls going on at a time. And then slowly it zeroes in on the 2 best fighters of the movie. And then for some reason has a second climax where Dalton's just a sneaker artist. But we'll get to that eventually.
You gotta love the double climax that just makes your movie 20 minutes longer in the 80s.
Exactly. You know? It makes it so much worth it too. This is one of the best double climax movies ever. I mean, I guess we're at the point where the first one is launched because Gazzara, as if he didn't use up enough dynamite at the fucking auto repair store where Doc's uncle's business goes under from exploding, he then goes to the farmer's place where Swayze is staying and sets that shit ablaze.
Oh, dude, hold on. We're skipping one thing. Can we go back for 1 second?
Of course.
I was like, dude, the monster truck. This is the first thing that he does.
Because I thought that was after. Yes.
No, dude, the business owners all kind of start uniting to being like, dude, it really just is Gazzara. He's the one guy. Like, we're actually kind of cool with the new Double Deuce, and we actually kind of like Dalton. And so putting such a public display of we're going to fuck with the bar and we're going to fuck with Dalton, the business owners decide that maybe as small businesses we can all unite against him. And Gazzara has his goon who he sets up, drives a monster truck 2 or 3 times in the movie, just so that you know, it's like it's total Chekhov's gun moment where they're like, this monster truck, it's not just in the background of the scene for no reason, right? And yes, one of the small business owners is a dealership owner, and the monster truck just fucking rips through an entire showroom of cars, crushing each one at a time. They only had 1 shot at filming this. It was an 8 camera setup, and it looks fucking amazing. They even put a camera underneath the truck so you get like the wheel crushing point of view shot, and and Gazzara just watching this monster truck to completely demolish a building and all these cars, and just throwing up like a, what are you gonna do, like kind of like, you know, like shrug kind of moment.
Kind of it's very beautiful kind of moment. It's amazing because it's like you take the car damage of the Blues Brothers and you condense it into 60 seconds, you know, like it's just, how could we get it's like they almost forgot that 80s action movies have to have a bunch of cars getting wrecked, and they're like, okay,
even though there's like no car chases in the movie, they're like, well, there's been a guy driving a monster truck the whole time, America, you know, just have him rip through it, and that is what reveals to Elliot's Wade character the sort of maniacally evil severity of this like Western turf war situation that all of a sudden they found themselves involved in. And he's more of like a classic like impartial gunslinger kind of fashion, more of like a Sergio Leone kind of guy. Kind of walks in and he's trying to get Dalton to be pragmatic. He's like, you don't need to put yourself on the line for these people. Just take your money and skip town. Like, they're clearly coming after you. And it's a scene you've seen before in a Western, but not with Swayze angrily working out through the entirety of it, rage punching his bag and rope climbing away from the conversation at one point because he's so frustrated that his be nice tactics and anti-violence philosophies like aren't gonna fix this situation. And I think, Jamie, that's the moment where he tries to punch Sam Elliott because he's like finally resorting back to his old angry, very like violence is the answer kind of mentality that he doesn't want to be in. But the extreme climax of that transition for him as a character is the one that Eddie was setting up, where there's the massive explosion where they try to blow up his farmer buddy who's renting him the loft, and Swayze needs to carry him out of the fucking burning building in his like Santa Claus long john. So it's just a great detail.
There's also a really awesome shot where it's like at first it's just Doc and Dalton kind of arguing about like what's going on with the relationship and how violent he's capable of being and blah 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 blah. And and in the shot
and behind her, right?
Where Doc, it's a shot of just Doc kind of arguing with him and talking to him, and within the shot in the background you can see the initial explosion pop off while she's talking in dialogue, and it's honestly like just on a technical level, and the timing is very impressive. And then you see the house on fire, and then the actual massive explosion as they're escaping and everything. It escalates so huge at this point, and I love it.
And that's when
and it's revealed that Jimmy, fight. Right?
Yeah.
Jimmy has planted the explosives and is trying to drive away on a dirt bike while maniacally laughing his way out of the crime scene, triggering the best and most precise kind of mano-a-mano martial arts fight in the movie between Swayze and Teague, where Swayze starts it by sprinting after his dirt bike in like a crazy rage and does this crazy stunt that's apparently half him and half stuntman, which actually pissed Swayze off because Swayze was like, I trained to do the stunt. I want to do the stunt. And everyone on set was like, dude, it is a dangerous stunt, and we all believe you can do it, but it's like if dangerous. You like break your if you break your wrist doing this stunt, then we don't get to do the fight, and we don't have 2 nights of shooting the fight. So like it's just not, we're not going to let you do it. But to sort of be nice to him, they let him do everything except for the final shot of the guy actually tackling, like leap dive tackling Teague off the bike. Mm-hmm. But everything prior to that, including Swayze's like big like leap off the hill and like falling into a bunch of mattresses, that was all, everything was him, but he had to fight for that because they were like, dude, we need you to focus on the stunt craft and your very ugly, bloody sort of like nighttime fight next to the stream. We don't
What's wild too is that when they filmed the fist fight, like Marshall ended up breaking Swayze's ribs, so they're like, save it for the fight, and then he actually ends up getting injured. So it's like wild. They must have been just going insane.
Well, they said they were both super comfortable with each other, and that was like they basically did that thing that Stallone and Dolph Lundgren did for Rocky IV, where they just said, look, we're both professionals, we've both learned how to do this shit, let's just do it once for the camera and actually beat the fuck out of each other, you know? And that's why this is such a good fight. Like so many great tackles and sandy roundhouse kicks. The rib cage punches do look pretty fucking damaging. My favorite is Swayze throwing that flying knee kick that he does. I was like, dude, where did that come from?
And again, similar to Walking Tall, they really do show the cuts and the damage to the body that these fights are bringing. So
oh my god,
I like how it escalates that. Like Swayze is not trying to be pretty boy by the end of this thing. I mean, this dude is covered in blood and bruises and cuts and whatever else. Like he's just going all out. So I love
so
that.
Sweaty.
Yeah. Like it's
dirty,
so
rolling
gritty.
in the mud with his boys, because again, the homoerotic stuff also has to come back in maybe what is arguably the hardest line ever written for an 80s action movie henchman.
My God.
Where Teague grabs him by the hair, pulls Swayze's ear up to his bloody mouth, and slimily declares, "I used to fuck guys like you in prison," which just comes out of nowhere. And if you're not even paying attention to it, it doesn't seem like they even underline it that much. No. But it's a fucking psychotically crazy sexual way for him to call him like a pussy that I've physically dominated in a fight. And it was like, dude, we kind of got that wordlessly, but they were like, no, we're gonna in his ear, we're gonna fucking say this.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but like he doesn't have a ton of lines, so this really stands out even more. Just given that the line would have stood out anyway. It's just funny that he's a very like, for the most part, kind of silent henchman, and then that's what he delivers. You're like, that's the reveal of his character. You're like, oh my lord, okay. And then
and it's that line that drives Patrick Swayze into overdrive, and the hand starts wiggling, and the trauma is unleashed, and he's gonna do it. He fucking delivers this fucking insane combo on him. It's like a combination. I want to say like 7 or 8 kicks and hits in a row that
and heavy impact hits too.
Oh yeah, and played in long take tracking along them, and it really enunciates the setting. I love the setting of this fight. It feels like a stage that you fight on in a fighting video game or something. It's just like an arena of two like insane fighters, you know.
And where he was beautifully practicing Tai Chi earlier, and now it's been corrupted by this evil he's about to have to do, which is tragically grab that man by the throat with his bare hands and tear it out like he's fucking Sonny Chiba in the Street Fighter, which I had to wonder if that was like a reference point for that, because I've never seen another character quite like do it in this exact way. It reminded me of Sonny Chiba fucking grabbing that dude's nuts and twisting them and pulling them in the Street Fighter.
The dick twist. Oh my god. I also like that he this is where you start to see him lose complete composure. Like, you know, he's been very stoic. He's the Tai Chi man. He's one with the universe, all of that. And then now he's just like on his knees screaming at the top of his lungs and going like, fuck you, to Wesley that's across the lake watching everything. Yeah, like this is when it just gets real gritty. Like the next shot is what you see, the body floating in the water, and I think Wesley sees it as it floats by.
Doc pulling it out to see if he's okay, and his throat's just fucking open and bleeding.
Oh yeah, it's wild. And then it just keeps escalating. Like he goes to the back to the bar, and fucking Sam Elliott has been stabbed, and he's like got a note in the stomach. He's oh god, he's starting to cry now. He's like completely distraught.
Well, all the animalistic violence is compounding, and it's meant to be so tragic for him. That's why he screams like "fuck you, Wesley!" Like it's for making me do this, you know. Like it's just like I'm capable of this, but I don't like that I'm capable of this, and you know. But the movie likes that he's capable of it, because that's why it gives him a fucking double action climax. They were like, let's see him fucking tear a throat out, kick the dude into the stream, and then add one more set piece, which is we go back to the Miami Vice mansion and we do a fucking siege on it in truly like 80s action movie weird and playfulness. Like it's so like Sam Elliott obviously is brutally killed with the knife, but it's crazy that he goes from pulling the knife out of Sam Elliott and being like, all right, I'm going to fucking use this against these guys. And he drives off to the mansion to kill Wesley and his nephew and all of the goons. And there is a great gag of all the goons waiting for him on the property. And one of them is just like very Hick style, itching his back with his shotgun.
Yeah.
You know, and you know that he means business because he pulls up with his Benz, not his shitty car.
That's right.
You know, so and he's driving his Benz at full.
With the Benz. He
not technically, but you think he does. You think he does.
Yeah.
Until he flips it. And then I just absolutely love when the car flips. They finally get to the actual henchman. They shoot it. It explodes, and then they look inside for the driver, and the fucking knife is stuck in the gas pedal. The gas pedal. And I was like, okay, so did it go through and then also connect to the like interior, and that's how it's being held down? Because I don't think just stabbing the pedal would do fucking anything. So I thought that was really funny. And
now you have to imagine he's like pinned it like the same way Michael Myers pins girls to walls.
Right,
you know?
exactly.
Like, I think
that's what I had to assume, but it
like
didn't
could
really
that body really be held by the weight of that knife? Not really. You know?
Yeah, it's such a great thought. And then
and
it
it's
just goes
the
on a
greatest
rampage.
diversion, because then he sneaks into the house and is able to cap them one by one, slowly accruing the help of the local businessmen who had been screwed over. But that's really only
it almost goes like a Steven Seagal slasher killer finale, like in like On Deadly Ground or something like that. Like it's so all of this stuff is so beautiful when they get to this stuff, because I don't know if we emphasize how big of a fireball that fucking Benz does either while it's flipping in midair. I think that's one of the craziest stunts of the 80s. And I watched the interview with the stunt coordinator, Charlie, and he said that was his son's first turnover in a car because he was getting his son into it. And so he was like, and actually Rowdy Herrington mentioned that Charlie berated his son after doing it, because he said, dude, you were supposed to land on the roof. You weren't supposed to do like a full flip and land on your wheels, because it's actually, you know. And Rowdy was like, dude, it was fucking sick. Let him like, let him,
one of the craziest
like that, like those guys firing the shotguns at it in midair, turning it into a fireball while it flips and it lands. He's like, it's fine. We got the shot.
And then turning him into like this killer figure, like honestly like a serial killer for a second, because they take away the focus from Dalton for a moment and actually focus on one of the guards that has a shotgun, and he's just going around inside the mansion looking at bodies that Swayze has taken care of already, and he's just like, oh my God,
I also love that frame of him approaching the one dude with the shotgun and Swayze's really quick kick as he shoots it off so it doesn't hit Swayze, and it actually goes to the left of the frame where it nails a lamp on the left of the frame to really emphasize like the shot that that just went off. Yeah. Which he then proceeds to stab that dude in the gut with a knife, killing him and spinning his corpse around towards the nephew who's on the upper level using a shotgun up there, and uses the guy who he just kicked his shotgun, stabbed him in the gut, and then uses him as a meat shield against the shotgun from the nephew, pulls the knife out of the gut and uses it as a throwing knife on the fucking nephew on the second story who falls to his death. Like the choreography and Kundi's like just very elegant shooting of it is genuinely just like phenomenal.
Yeah.
And also, it's like, how do you prepare for that from being a cooler? Like that is like some fucking SEAL Team 6 shit that he's pulling
that's
off.
CIA
like,
shit.
It's so funny that he's able to pull that shit off just because like, well, you know, he might be a really tough cooler, but he's also really smart. So that's probably why he's able to do it. You know, he has a philosophy degree.
And then the mix of like tonal kills here is wild, because you just explained that, which is just totally badass and like you said, Navy SEAL-esque. And then the fat guard guy is sneaking around, and he just gets scared of the moving polar bear that Dalton is pushing towards him.
I love his cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha as he's like, as it's falling towards him in like a point of view shot.
Yeah,
he's
and then
doing
so scared.
The curly noise from the Three Stooges. Like he's a
that's what it is.
Or rather, Lou Costello from Abbott and Costello. Yeah, I know. It's so funny. Just like old timey, goofy ass comedy. And then finally the showdown when they're in the trophy room. After I do love
Gazara's line about the trophy room.
I was about to say, after I used to fuck guys like you in prison, my next favorite line in the movie is Gazara coming through and saying, "Dalton, I see you found my trophy room. The only thing that's missing is your ass."
I thought he was going to say head, and then when he said ass, I was like, okay.
It's so much better that it's ass, because everyone has been looking at those cheeks, man, and he's like, dude, I want those cheeks on my wall. You know, that would be a fair replacement for "you taking all my boys," which is another line he has too. "You've taken all my boys."
Gazara has been watching him through binoculars, thrusting with that ass on his rooftop for 2 weeks.
That's
now,
right.
and now he needs it on his wall.
And it's so funny too, like he like after they have their fight, and he like fucks up Wesley's knee, and he actually has him, like he could kill him or whatever, and then the doctor walks in, and I guess he kind of has a spark of like, well, I don't want to show that side of me in front of her again, so I'm gonna refrain from doing so, but don't worry, we're just gonna still get Wesley to get fucking absolutely demolished. But I do find it funny that Dalton has that moment after killing probably 20 dudes in a house, and it like brutally too. So yeah, it's all the philosophy by the end is so up in the air, but who gives a shit? You know what I mean? It's just so much fun.
Exactly.
Because then
he doesn't want to be reduced to Gazara's level, right? That's the whole, he doesn't, the whole idea of like fighting animalistically and pulling the spears and surrounded by all of these, sort of big game hunting kills that he's taken. He's like, I don't want to be like this guy. I'm not going to tear his throat out. I don't want to be a killer. And he's going to let the old town, all the old schlubby local business owners are going to take their justice, and they get to shotgun Gazara with 4 or 5 of some of the biggest squibs of the 1980s, just fucking nailing him until he falls through his table, and they're going, "This is our town, and don't you forget it."
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And then cut again, just to have just to have some like levity, so you feel a little bit good about all the violence that you saw. They have the big guard that was crushed by the polar bear just get out of it, and he's just kind of chill about it, and just like, yeah, I'm not gonna say anything.
I do love the cops rolling in and be like, hey, who's gonna tell me what happened here? I didn't see anything. You? Yeah. No, I didn't see anything. You? And then polar bear fell on me.
Polar bear fell on me.
We'll just trust that they're not going to do any forensics.
That is an insane last line of narrative dialogue before cutting to what Eddie referred to earlier as a cover of Bob Dylan's When the Night Comes Falling from the Sky, covered by the Jeff Healey Band, as Kelly Lynch and Swayze skinny dip and make out and roll music video credits, baby.
Hell yeah.
Roadhouse.
Awesome.
Beautiful. What a beautiful movie.
It is.
You know,
it really is.
I feel a lot of feelings while watching it.
Yes.
I cried a couple times.
Yep. This is I gotta be honest, I think I've convinced myself we're already in the reductive rating. This is a 5 for me.
Nice. Nice.
This is it's only my second time watching it, but it is just and it's not a perfect movie, but that's besides the point. A 5 doesn't need to be a perfect movie.
Yeah, it's
for
almost
me.
part of it. You know?
It's such an amazing mix of doing, again, updating these kind of like old Western formula tropes, but doing so with a guy who was just, for some reason, was just born to make one movie. And he made the movie, and he was able to use all of the money and resources and talent from just like the Joel Silver 80s action excess machine, and to apply it to a character that even he knew was ridiculous, but he saw something in just him and Swayze both latched on, he said, to the central contradiction of the character, which is that he's so tortured tragically by this thing, this skill that he has, this thing that he's amazing at, that he knows intellectually and morally and philosophically is entirely wrong, but he's in a movie that requires it to happen cathartically. Mm-hmm. And there's something so beautiful about that combination. And Swayze's physical performance is at the top of his game. He went all in on applying all of the skills of his graceful sort of like dancing background that he had. And I actually read too that the choreographer Benny was the one who had the idea. He said that at first he was actually kind of struggling to pick it up, but he started training him to music and started giving him the like 1 and 2 and 3 sort of like cues you get when you're learning dance choreography. And Swayze picked it up so naturally that the stunt coordinator Charlie actually had to go up to him and say that he was actually too clean. His fighting was too graceful, and that they needed to rough him up because it doesn't make sense for the movie. Right. So they actually said that you need to be a little bit clumsier of a fighter. And so to do that and just merge like so much of the sort of 80s action excess, clean martial arts choreography and stunt coordination, Dean Kundi's very elegant widescreen framing. It's just I have a hard time believing anyone watches this and doesn't on some level think that what this movie is doing is deliberate. The people who made it know that it's a broad, silly commercial script for 13-year-old boys that's meant to be bar bouncers are cowboys.
Yeah.
It's like everybody knows that, and it works as both the charming and sincere and laid back sort of like modern hangout, you know, neo-Western that it wants to be. And when it suddenly swerves into the absurdly big sort of martial arts fights and explosions and excessive 80s action craft that's beautiful and glorious and I miss so much, it doesn't make any sense for the milieu of the movie. It doesn't make sense for the real world, but it, as Eddie was putting, it makes this specific world feel bigger and more emotionally and physically satisfying than it should. And all movies should aspire to do that. The idea that anyone thinks the entertaining aspects or the pleasurable aspects of this movie are an accident is insane to me.
Yeah, that's insane.
They knew the contradiction and they leaned into it beautifully. And yeah, it's just macho Western 80s dive bar melodrama, sick martial arts movie all in one. The only other movie I can think of that is on any remotely similar plane is maybe John Woo's Hard Target, which is mixing Hong Kong and Western and sort of American macho, you know, ridiculousness. But for that reason alone, it is destined to be like a drunken boys' night classic until probably the end of time, which is exactly how I watched it and exactly how I intend to watch it. And in that context, 5-star movie.
Nice. Yeah,
man.
I think I'm still in the like Jamie 4 territory. I think it's going to get added to that list. But it definitely has the potential of becoming something that I think is just kind of masterful, because the way that this thing is balancing so many different ideas and also just having fun with it feels just like I really truly haven't seen anything like it. It is uniquely itself. It's like just a singular movie. It obviously has inspirations. We've seen certain things like that, like with them playing kind of like a cowboy character and everything. But just the mix of tones and going from like the kind of like almost, it seems like small issues, small problems of just being a cooler for a bar, leading up to like full-on house explosions and attempting of assassinations and stuff like that. And it just the escalation somehow feels natural, even if it shouldn't, because like we said earlier, it's so well directed and over directed that once it gets to those points, you already believe in just the ridiculousness of this world.
Oh, it totally creates a magical, tongue-in-cheek, macho dream reality of its own, and it just confidently struts through it. You believe every second of it, unless you don't, in which case I don't like you. But anyway, keep going. Sorry, I interrupted.
Exactly. No, I agree. I totally agree. And yeah, it's beautifully shot. I mean, the amount of brawls in this, you'd think it almost get kind of monotonous, but it doesn't. Every brawl feels different. There's different choreography. There's different things happening, whether it be a different way someone gets thrown through a table or gets hit with a bottle. Like, it doesn't matter. It's all just very beautiful and well thought out, and still chaotic. Like, it still feels like natural, and like these brawls are happening just very naturally. Like, they just let the actors and stuntmen go crazy, and it feels like that. And I love it. I love the chaos and destruction. So yeah, this is awesome. I'm gonna give it the Jamie 4 for now, but we'll see going back to it, because this is one of those movies I'm probably gonna go back to like every couple years, kind of thing. So,
hell yeah, for you, Eddie.
I mean, going back to it every few years is definitely the right way to do it. I was at a 4 for this for a long time, but it's gotten the upgrade over time. Josh, you brought up Hard Target as a comparison, and that is really what clicks for me. Is like my last review on Letterboxd of Hard Target was that it's probably the dumbest masterpiece of all time. And I think Roadhouse is in that same vein, where I'm not using dumb as a pejorative, but like, as we said, Joel Silver said it, it's a movie for 13-year-old boys, but you can make a masterpiece with the target audience being 13-year-old boys who want to watch fights and titties. And I think that this is like just one of the best movies of the 80s and one of my favorites. I've watched it so many times. It always bugs me a little bit that it's called Roadhouse and it has 2 climaxes and neither of them are at the Roadhouse. But that's kind of part of the charm of this movie, is that there's going to be contradictions like that throughout the whole thing. It's a 5 for me. I love this movie.
Hell yeah.
Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for Roadhouse and for this week's episode. That was once again Walking Tall from 1973 and Roadhouse from 1989. Thanks so much, Eddie, for joining us and for talking through these movies with us and going long. These were actually pretty long movies, so I actually maybe expected the episode to maybe even be a little longer, since they were both like Roadhouse I think is just under 2 hours, but Walking Tall is over 2 hours, which is kind of crazy considering its premise. But yeah, this was a blast. And if you've got anything to plug while you're here, like what's going on in Eddie's world, what's going on over on the clip?
Oh boy, it's business as usual on Extended Clip, and by that I mean we are still doing 2 episodes a week. You know, it's a movie podcast, much like this one. We've been doing a lot of good stuff lately, having more like directors on. We had Mike Balandak last week, who did the movie Job's World. We had him talking about that one and about Light Sleeper, a Sleazoids classic, I'm sure.
Good movie.
We recently did a 3-episode miniseries covering the films of Takeshi Kitano, and I know you guys like him. So
Sonatine,
we're just gonna
one of the best 90s movies.
Oh yeah, Sonatine was the MVP of the miniseries. Even if Hanabi is like always going to be a favorite of mine, Sonatine was the MVP of the series for sure. We're talking about the classics. We're having new friends and old on, more directors, but also some Critics coming up too. Couple big ones I'm in the process of, but I don't want to spoil anything, in case it falls through. But yeah, so go check out Extended Clip. We are doing it twice a week, and even if you don't like me like online and stuff, the podcast is nice. It's very nice and sweet.
Do it. Please be listening to The Clip. I did a bunch of guest episodes back in the day, and we'll definitely be going on again at some point. We got to figure something out again.
Of course.
For our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time, where we are going to be going, as Jamie alluded to in the intro, rat mode. I've had a double feature that I watched that I thought of because when I was a kid, I loved a movie by Gore Verbinski called Mouse Hunt.
Yeah.
I don't know that it made it much of a transition out of the VHS era, but it came out on Blu-ray in the last year or two, and I rewatched it, and I was like, this is still a very strong movie. So much visual absurdity to it, and a very unique premise of guys just going and saying that there's a mouse in their house, and it turning into some like Rube Goldberg like absurdist comedy action set pieces. But I got to see a movie a year or two ago on a print that reminded me of the movie in terms of premise. And I was like, dude, how have I never heard of this? Called Of Unknown Origin, which has Peter Weller as a dude, as like a yuppie who's going and saying that there's a rat in his house. And it turns into like a full-on monster, like horror movie. And it's directed by George P. Cosmatos, who did Rambo 2.
Yeah.
So it has a little bit of that like 80s absurd extremity to it, but it's like Peter Weller going insane because there is like a giant rat who at a certain point is getting big enough that it could actually take him physically. And anyway, it's a wild movie. So we're going to be talking guys fighting rats is the double feature next week over on the Patreon. And then in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be back with a very special guest talking 2 movies I haven't seen, The Legend of Boggy Creek and Wendigo.
Cool.
Which
Legend of Boggy Creek seems really familiar. I wonder if I've watch listed that.
I feel like these are the ones that I've seen that kind of look like Bigfoot horror adjacent kind of deal. That might not be 100% accurate, but that's the kind of vibe that I got. And we very much trust the guests who picked these 2 movies. So I'm very excited to talk about both of those. And normally we don't say the third one, but 3 weeks from now it is your patron voted episode as well, where you guys voted for The Boxer's Omen and Ricky-O, The Story of Ricky, which you promise is a movie that is going to absolutely melt our brains. So yeah, I'm excited to do that.
We actually did an extended clip on Ricky-O, The Story of Ricky a while back. That one is fucking insane. I'm surprised you guys haven't done an episode on that one yet.
I love that movie.
I also wanted to say real quick, the next episode of Extended Clip that's going to come out is on the movie that I initially wanted to pair with Roadhouse.
Oh yeah, My Bodyguard, right?
On doing a Roadhouse episode. Yeah, My Bodyguard, another 80s movie, basically on as far away from Roadhouse as you can possibly get for an 80s movie about a bodyguard.
And who was in that? Adam Baldwin and someone else?
It's Matt Dillon.
Is it Matt Dillon?
Chris Makepeace and Adam Baldwin. And Ruth Gordon as well, a few years after Harold and Maude. It is an incredibly sweet and funny movie. So I'm about to record that one with comedy star Nick Ciarelli, who makes some of the funniest videos online. So watch out for that episode dropping very soon.
Yeah, go check it out. That was definitely, I remember Eddie specifically being like, when he pitched a Roadhouse episode like a year or two ago, that was the original pairing, and we ended up kind of switching it up
for the better.
But I'm glad we did. This ended up very, very well, I think. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for that's going to wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, everyone, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.